but you don't have to have a conclusion.
And you're asking, I think it's first off is a really good point. We should really know what the criteria are for the process, so you're raising a good question. My understanding was that when they're putting that application in, they have to say that they've, and I'm looking at you, Jeff, because you're on the hot seat.
That's fine.
That they have to check a box that say they comply with all the regulations of the municipality in which they're applying. If those applications are going in April, that's the point at which that box needs to be checked. So if they say, yeah, I comply because there's no zoning, they can do that, which is why the other communities have done moratoriums, heaven forfend. So if we don't have it, that's why the rush, right?
Well, I guess my question would be what pamphlet is being referenced?
It was municipal guidance. I think it was either the KP Law one or there was another one. I'll send it to you.
Sure.
I
No,
just
if
like
it's
clarity.
either of
I see your
those,
point.
I'd like to know the answer too.
Well, I also think that to clarify Councilor Ritz's question, I think April 1st is the earliest date, so I agree with you that we should try to get as close to that as possible, but we do need to deliberate. We have to wait for March 15th to come around.
Right.
And then it doesn't have to be April 1st, but we should try to get as close to that so people could start
I
submitting
think the
licenses.
first meeting in April might be the date you could probably come forward, but if you have to meet as a group again because of the new regs, I think you should.
Can we
Well,
meet
just to
without
clarify, when we started this process in August and we knew that we weren't going to have final regs in time for the planning board to get this to the city council in time, and the decision then was rather than do a moratorium or something like that, but to make sure the city council could vote on it in time, that basically the planning board would operate in as much light as the state would give us until then, which we knew we were going to eventually get draft regs. So, excuse me, we talked about sort of general stuff before we had the draft regs, and then once we had the draft regs, we started putting together a more solid proposal. But those draft regs changed things from what we originally discussed, and the final regs, I think, could very well change things more. And the understanding all along has been that we will propose a bylaw to the city council without having the final regs, and the city council and the planning department will have to amend that and implement that however they can before it gets voted on. Because I think the risk is that if someone applies, my understanding with this has always been, I mean, the way zoning works with applications is that you lock in your zoning when you apply for your license. And so if someone applies on April 1st and they check that box and they've got their application submitted, if we pass a bylaw on April 15th, people who applied in those first 2 weeks will not be covered by that bylaw. And so I think that the risk is real. I think that there is a danger to that because I don't think any of us want to have no bylaws in place.
That's contrary to what the municipal statement that I'd like you to find out if we're under that kind of pressure. On the other hand, if we do it by the first meeting in April, which I think would be April 5th, 6th, I forget. I think you're going to be okay, but I'd like to learn more, Jeff,
I think
on
as
that.
far as the planning board is concerned, I mean, based on the timelines that we've been given, we need to vote on our draft tonight. And if the city council, I mean, presumably you will get the final regs before you vote on it. I would hope that would be the process. But I don't think that we can hold up our meeting tonight because I think that could be irreversible.
All right, I'm not asking you, I understand now, okay. So the ordinance committee will get the final regs and the council will make amendments as necessary.
Yes, we can.
That's,
Yes.
and we always could do that, I know that, but I'm just,
But we've known that
I
that would
didn't
be an
wanna-
essential step to this process.
so there may be some major changes like the
Huge.
social
Could be
consumption
anything,
that'll
right.
happen, okay.
And Dan, also, there's nothing stopping the planning board once they make their vote for them to say, we saw the final regs, we think this now. There's nothing to stop them from sending the council a further recommendation. So I think that's important too. It's not like they're out of the process.
So I have a couple more questions, Mr. Begg, maybe you can answer this. If we limit the quantity, I was enlightened, and I want to thank everybody. You've been calm, there's two sides here. This is democracy, I love it. I hope it happens Thursday night too, but that's another story. Because you've all got really strong feelings, and I want you to know, just in all transparency, I was opposed to legalization, but I've learned so much from Councilor Derby and other councilors and all of you that the fear that drove me to that vote has been lessened a great deal. So we have to keep educating those who were opposed to it, like me, and you need to give us time. You realize how long it took? I was never there, never against gay marriage, but do you know how long it took people to come around for that? And they're still not there, many of them. But it's come a long way. just give us time. Those of us that fear it, they're real, perceptions are real. The school department's concerns are real for them. They may not seem that way for some of you, the buffer zones, etc. I still want a buffer zone, but God help us if we pass the schools, if we build them, there won't be schools where we'll have buffer zones. Just saying. If we limit the quantity to so many, okay, I'm interested in the 20% thing. That's interesting. I guess you can. Can't you guys know this? Can you go above that? I guess you can.
That's the
the
limit.
minimum.
Of the low
Yeah,
limit.
it's a minimum.
That's a minimum. The 20% is
That's
the
why
minimum.
Northampton
Yeah.
introduced
That's
no limit.
That's what I was asking.
It's a minimum, you would
Okay.
need a ballot
So you
question
could
to
go. You
below
could
that.
go as high as you want.
Yeah,
Or just no limit.
yeah. There could
Right.
be
You
no
could
limit,
do that.
or we
I
could
don't
say-
recommend that,
Right.
but you could
Well,
do
just
that.
like we don't have a limit on gas stations.
Please.
Just saying.
All right. So if you have a limit, hopefully we decide to go slow and start with 5 or 6 the first year. Let's say we do that, and you get 10 applications. Who's making that decision?
First come,
Jeff?
first served.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
First come,
it's
first serve.
First
Yep.
serve.
So,
But remember, it
Based-
takes
based
a
on
lot
the
to get an
merits.
application in.
Well, yeah, based
It's a
on a
lot of
completed-
effort and time.
all right,
Completed
this is what
application,
concerns
and we
me,
build
and it's too bad if there's no law that prevents this. Counselor Zaret informed me there are major corporations that are trying to get businesses already in Easthampton. They have the advantage of money and legal money, because I want to see this happen for our small businesses in town, and I don't want them pushed aside by big corporations from Colorado, from wherever, coming in and getting these licenses first. So if we have a limit of 5 and there's 10 applications, and the first 5 are big corporations for retail, we have no say?
Well, we've done big box ideas before, limiting maximum square footage for certain business types, and that's where we have some controls, or
Yeah, but you don't have those in the regs now.
well, they're not in the
No,
regs, and they're
but
not heavily
that's
considered.
also, it's gotta be based on the actual project itself, it's not based on the people behind it. So, I mean, we've been
It's a
talking a lot
limited-
about equity and discrimination, right? I mean, you can't decide that, we're gonna give preference to an East Hampton business versus one that's outside, but also there'd be no real way, if you're talking about a big corporation, it's pretty easy to create a local company here that's the one that's actually applying. I mean, it would be pretty difficult to enforce, but
That's true.
more importantly, I
That's true.
just don't think it's something that we can do. It's gotta be based on the project. So the big box store stuff that was discussed was if you've got retail space of 75,000 feet or more, so you can.
I just want to not see the smaller groups that might be wanting to come in to be pushed aside, and it looks like that'd be hard to
It would be
regulate.
hard. And also, Dan, I think, one of the things to recognize is there are quite a few people in the audience opening businesses in Easthampton.
Right.
I don't necessarily know what their financial backing is, but I know that they've been attending meetings and that they're on it. And so they'll probably be the ones that are applying first. And it might maybe take a big corporation a little bit to catch up.
All right, so just so everybody in the room knows where I stand, I do favor retail. I just want us to go slower. I do want us to go to a slower 5 maybe the first year. Now that we don't have social consumption, that has to be looked at. So that's where I'm at. I am in favor of a buffer zone. I've heard, and I agree with the school department, and I think they have to be listened to, but I'm willing to compromise. I'm very happy that you went to 350. I'm at 400 now. I've gone my way a little bit. I just think we need to let this play out, get some data for public safety, we'll get it. That's where I'm at, okay? But I'm still listening. Just so you know, I am not rigid in anything, and thanks for all your hard work. It's so hard. So, just so you know, Counselor Derby, I hope we can look at this again after March 15th.
Thank you for your thoughtfulness.
Yeah, back at you with the respect, Dan.
Thank you.
All right, so, I mean,
Time
I
gets
think,
busy.
in light of the fact that the fact that the regs aren't finalized, and so a lot of the language from the state isn't finalized, I think that as a planning board, what we should really be thinking of is sort of the bigger policy questions to answer, with the understanding that the planning department and the city council will get that into a final document as far as cleaning up language and making it consistent with the state regs and that sort of thing. I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense for us to be revising detailed language and going through sort of consistency issues and that sort of stuff, as opposed to dealing with sort of these bigger issues we've talked about, buffers with schools, buffers from each other, number of licenses, cap, how that's phased in. So that would be my proposal.
I'm like loosely there, but I'm not quite sure what you're saying exactly. Do you want to go through step by step and then sort of decide to leave it as is? You want to loosely go through? Is that
No,
what
I mean,
you're
I
saying?
do think that we need to go through it, but I think we need to go through it with the understanding that, you know, for example, all the definitional language in here could very easily change. And I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. And also that some of the other things, you know, we don't always use the same definitional terms throughout the whole thing. I think that needs to get cleaned up, but I don't think we need to go through and edit that.
No, but if
Right,
someone
yes,
has
that one.
something they want to call out.
Definitely. I have no problem with that.
So how do you want to walk through it?
So can I
I
just
think
add,
we should
can I
just
just add
walk
one
through
thing to not answer all the questions, but I think one of the concepts is for you to get a handle on the bigger policy questions that have been raised, and then that would be what gets presented to the full city council for their debate. So you do need to kind of finalize whether you're going to have a cap on the number of retail
Right.
establishments
agreed.
and propose a buffer so that when it gets to the city council, they'll have a set of regulations that they will then evaluate further, right?
Yeah,
So that's
I
the
think, I
general
mean, I
concept.
think the end result with this, we will have a final version to propose. It's just with the understanding that this is all up in the air still.
Well, they
and-
can do whatever they want with it anyway.
right.
so-
Well, and you
Right.
guys can still have input after
Yeah.
the 15th.
Okay.
So, and then
Let's
I
walk
said
through
I
it.
wasn't going to talk, and I have this habit. There's
Please
one
do.
thing. There's one thing I think is important for me to explain to this group because I think it could come up at the city council level, which is the timeline issue that Mr. Rist raised. So, if an applicant, so to take a step back, on late December is when the Cannabis Control Commission issued their draft regulations, and from that point on, there was new information and a slightly revised process for municipalities. So what I wanted to reiterate is that in the draft regulations, there were two items that you would consider safeguards for a municipality. So it said that a marijuana establishment and the municipality would have to enter into a host community agreement. And that would have to happen before they submit to the Cannabis Control Commission. And the second element is that, give me a second here. So the second element was
Community meeting?
the community meeting, thank you. That a marijuana establishment would have to hold a community outreach hearing prior to submitting to the CCC. So in my professional opinion, those two things were safeguards for the municipality. And the way it works right now is that those two things would have to happen before they submit to the Cannabis Control Commission. So in theory, those things would slow down an April 1st filing. So with that understanding, that has been my primary concern if changed between now and the final regulations. If either of those two things were removed from the regulations, then I think the city is very interested in making sure they have something on April 1st, because an applicant could then just file directly with the CCC. And that was how it was before December when the regulations came out. After that, there was some process that happened before they submit. So that would be the thing that I would want to be careful with the city council, is if those two provisions were removed, then the city council would want to act efficiently to get something on the books for April 1st.
Can I just clarify something?
Yes.
But since we have the community host agreement in our local ordinance, if we pass it before April 1st and the state takes out the host agreement piece we still have that in our zoning.
Right. Well, that's
So-
where there's that unreasonably impracticable
Yeah.
language that you could conceivably have someone say that having that provision up front is unreasonably impracticable and in conflict with the regulations. So that's my primary concern, is if those two items are removed for some reason, then the city would be moving faster for April 1st. If those two stay in place, then I think you do have the
Little
time of the
buffer.
city council to amend.
But we'll know by March, that's also in the March 15th.
Exactly.
Right,
Yes,
all
right.
So we
Right.
need to have an ordinance meeting right after that.
Yeah, right after.
Great.
Okay.
Walk through it.
Yeah, I think we should walk through it.
Great.
So I guess we'll start with the purpose section. I think as far as our recommendation, I don't think the resolution of the city council, that first page, I don't think we need
Yeah,
to.
you don't need to.
We
Yeah,
don't need to
great.
address that. So if we just start at 10.10.1, does anybody have any issues?
Replace residents with the public.
So just so you know, that has been changed. The last piece is that This ordinance should serve as a guide that will support the citizens' right to access legal cannabis, protecting the public health and safety, and expanding new growth for the tax base. That was some feedback that we had gotten at the last meeting.
So just that last sentence.
Yep. just the last
But
sentence.
you've got the second sentence there is the one that you want to change.
I want to
The
change the
zoning
word
will serve-
residents
right.
to the public.
Create a place for the public to
Where?
respond. The second sentence, the zoning will serve to preserve the character of the community and create a place for the public to responsibly have access to legal cannabis
Oh,
while
yeah.
mitigating community impact.
And why do we have to have the word citizens' right to access? Can't we use the public's? Or
Yeah, right?
do we need to use the term citizen? Are we limiting it to a citizen?
I tend to agree the public's
I think
a better.
public is broader.
Public is
Yeah,
fine.
public's a better way.
It's a great question.
You have to have a green card to.
Yeah.
You have to have an ID.
Any planning board members have
Reserve
any
21.
issues with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Eric?
Nice job.
No?
Okay,
Okay.
moving forward.
Okay.
Scope, I think the scope is
Pretty similar.
generally acceptable. Anybody have any changes or comments on that?
Nope.
Okay. Definitions. My only thought here, I know Salem, that you said you thought the final version may switch to the use of cannabis too.
Yeah.
That would obviously clean things up.
Right.
I think it's always confusing to have definitions that don't exactly mirror what the state regs are,
I
but
mean, they are the Cannabis Control Commission.
I know. But I guess that's certainly an issue that there's no real point in discussing it at this point. I don't think until we
Right.
see what the final regs are. So I would certainly say that the issue of cannabis versus marijuana.
I would contend it's not an issue. The word marijuana is offensive, and it shows leadership to change it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Any issues with the definitions generally, with the understanding that I think the goal is to basically take those directly from the regulations, right? So
That's what we did.
I mean, I think that concept makes sense. I think probably it's worth the discussion about whether or not we include on-site at all in this or not in light of the recent decision today.
It's a big question. I think clearly there's nothing wrong with our leaving it in. The language that I heard today was really interesting. Some of the things you said, they've removed it. All the stuff that I read is that they delayed it, that they're
Correct.
pushing it out. The language that people use, they speak, is very important here. You hear people say all the time, 500 is what the state said. In this particular case, we're talking about the removal was the language that you used, Jeff. Now, don't get me wrong, I think you're fantastic. I'm really impressed. No, really, you're awesome. But that language is really important. They've delayed their discussions. We talked about the February date, et cetera. We read the same materials. This doesn't mean it's not in there. It means there was tremendous pressure from the AG and from the governor, and they're punting it a little bit. It's still coming, and I think it's best for us to be prepared and keep what we've already discussed at length in here.
I would agree with that. I just want to make sure that we do it in a way that's not confusing. So I don't know if that's a graying out of these particular sections, saying, with the caveat that in April or in October 2018, there's maybe like a disclaimer, so it's not confusing to people that are coming to Easthampton. I just don't want to spend another 7 months trying to get this back in.
Well, the language in there already specifies that to the extent consistent with commission regulations.
Right, and I don't know, I guess I'm deferring to the planner to how we could do this in a way that's not going to be onerous to the committees that have put in so much work on this, and will be responsive to this when it rolls out.
Isn't it true that if they have to already, just what Owen quoted there, if they have to already meet that, and there's no reg at the state, that they simply won't be able to use it without using, they can't do anything with this until the.
My approach all along in the past 2 years studying this has been to just take a municipal process approach. I am really objective on this whole entire consideration that you guys have been with for a while. I think from a municipal process position, it would create confusion to have the zoning remain in. I think that there are maybe a couple different ways to handle it. What the discussions I heard listening to the meeting today was that they were going to take the year or so to flesh out additional requirements and regulations. They were going to identify a clearer process for municipalities, which the chairperson kind of just put into the bucket of we'll work. We got because they have a substantial amount of work just to get the retail licensing in place. So the discussion that I heard today, listening to the recording of the meeting, was that there's a lot still that they want to consider and put in place. That doesn't mean that your zoning isn't suitable, but it will not have all of the additional information in it. With all this said, I didn't mean to necessarily dictate an approach tonight. It was merely just letting everyone know that this, in their 3-day policy debate, is a substantial issue. My recommendation would be something more to have the city council make a final decision as to whether it stays in or out based on what the final regulations say. Because there was a discussion that in the regulations it would say that on-site social consumption is expressly prohibited until or if some future change. So there's a lot of language that there's still things that could happen between now and Wednesday or now and 2 weeks from now. So keeping it in at this point, I think it's fine, but I think there becomes another question when the city council's taking it up as to whether it should stay. Maybe we can get some more opinions about how that would work and the ramifications
Well,
either
part
way.
of the problem too with that is, as we've said before, we're waiting to find out the guidance on whether or not we can do this without a ballot question, and that we're now not going to find out until next year. So we can, I mean, obviously the definition of an adult on-site cannabis consumption operator or an establishment, like you can have that definition in there and that's not a problem, but like whether we authorize it, it seems crazy to me that we would authorize something when we don't have any of the regs on it and we don't even know if we're allowed to do it without a ballot question. And for me personally, especially as a planning board member, I'm not an elected representative, and all the legal guidance that I've seen on it has said that we can't do it without a ballot question. I'm certainly not comfortable myself voting for that in this context to sort of push the envelope in a legal field like that where I don't feel like we're even going to get the guidance from the commission on that. And I think, as I said at the last hearing, I think that it's really ripe for confusion to have sections on on-site consumption when we don't have state regs or authorization for businesses to do it yet. And I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect that we would be back here or back at a city council hearing in a year drafting regs with the full state regs completed on on-site consumption and figuring out how to make that work in Easthampton. That's my own personal opinion on it.
I would agree. I think it's confusing to leave it in when we just don't know what's going to happen with it.
I wonder if there's any way to create language as a placeholder.
There may
Well, I
be.
mean-
There may be. It's just whether we can do it now or in 2 weeks when the
Right,
city
I mean,
council
we
begins to
should
pick it up.
basically plan to meet shortly after the March meeting to really,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
So
I'm
is
in line with
the-
that thinking. Sorry, go ahead, Peg.
Oh, sorry, Jim. So is the concept of removing this a given, or that's just where they're leaning, and they haven't come out with their final?
So
They voted
from what
on it.
I understand,
Oh,
they voted to take that policy position today.
Okay.
I would imagine, as any public hearing, there's nothing that says they cannot open the public hearing and make a different decision tomorrow or
Okay.
Wednesday.
I
But,
didn't
so I just
realize
wanted
it
to
was
put it out there
formalized.
that it's significant, and
Okay.
my previous point is just those other two components are really essential. This one is a point of confusion that could be clarified one way or the other. I think seeking some guidance between now and when the final regulations come out would be
I
appropriate.
think also, Owen, as far as a placeholder, I mean, I think like we fleshed this out over the last, 8 months or whatever we've been doing, right? And so like we know we could come right back here and have the same questions about caps and buffers and zoning and that sort of stuff. And I don't think it would take us as long as it's taken us here, although frankly a lot of this time was spent waiting for the regs. So
We'd have to go through hearings again to
we would
put it
have to
back
go
in.
through hearings,
Same
and we would have to go
process.
back to the city council and get sent back to us. There would definitely be a process for that.
But we could look at these old documents that we created as a
Right.
basis and
Yeah.
and dredge that
Right.
out.
I mean, it would be more similar to what we're doing tomorrow night.
Right.
Yeah.
With
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
easier meeting.
I hope to see all of you there then too.
I'll be there
So
for
we
the
just essentially be
chicken
amending the
ordinance.
So-
ordinance.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
that'd be
amending,
the smart-
but I also agree with councilors there that putting a placeholder section
Agreed.
for adult on-site consumption makes sense, because that way we have a place for it to go, and when we do it,
That's
it's
fair.
it's nice and clean.
Yep.
And I have no problem
And
with
put
leaving.
it, so you would put it in the actual body of the ordinance, it says like
I would say
when,
10.10,
10.6, adult
six,
on-case consumption,
held or reserved for,
future use.
I can't remember what the
oh, so,
word
so
is.
reserve, but not put in any of the actual
Right.
Yeah,
rules
no
and regs,
language.
because we
Right.
don't have state regs yet.
Exactly.
I think that's reasonable. If we have
Right.
the
Oh, so you
definition
just mean
from the
the heading?
regs.
Yeah,
The
it's
heading, you
just a
mean?
heading. I can't
To
remember.
the
We
extent-
actually
to the
have it. It's
extent
like
consistent-
reserved.
To the extent consistent with commission regulations.
nothing.
No,
Nothing.
None of
nothing.
that, just that
No.
heading.
Adult
But just
on-site
a heading,
consumption.
and no, nothing below it.
Just
though.
the
Right.
ones
Yeah,
involved.
correct.
Just
Reserved.
reserved.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we've done these in the past as a planning board, when we get to issues like this, we do a sort of mini vote to put it in or not. So I guess the proposal would be to include the definition for on-site consumption from the state regs, whatever that is, and reserve 10.10.6 for adult on-site social consumption to be completed in the future.
Don't we have to actually include in that motion to strike the language that's there?
We would strike all other language about on-site consumption through the whole bylaw in connection with that.
Sorry, just can't support that.
Well, so, you make that
I'll move
motion?
to- Yeah, I'll move to.
Okay,
do
so
that.
there's a motion, is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, so, all in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so that's included going forward, and then we'll vote on the final one at the end anyways. Any other issues with the definitional language? All right, moving on to the next hot topic, the buffer. So 10.10.4, place A, the draft language says no cannabis establishment shall be located within 350 feet of pre-existing public or private school providing education in kindergarten or any of grades 1 through 12 in operation at the time of application for a special permit or site plan approval as measured by a typical path of travel door to door.
I'd like to start by saying thank you to Dan Rist, who was the first person I heard who was against, and consider that I was against this 2 years ago. I work in the addiction industry. I was adamantly against this and studied this for 2 years before I changed my own mind. But we have been discussing this and giving for something in my case that I think is wrong, but I recognize that you also think, to the other end, some of you, that it's wrong. And to that end, I've been trying to negotiate. I've been trying, working hard, even though I don't agree, and I know you don't agree, to reach some place in the middle that will accommodate the needs of those that want more safety for the children and those of us that don't think it's as much of an issue. And finally, with Dan Rist, I don't know if you're still out there somewhere, I heard someone say, yes, we need to take your needs into consideration. It's not just me. Thank you. That's huge. And if 400 is your magic number, the difference to me between 350 and 400, for me, they're both bad. I'm willing to make that flex. Thank you for being willing to meet me a little bit at least.
I mean, the other thing that we haven't talked about much, although we did many moons ago, is the idea of a different buffer for different uses. I think it appears that most of the concern about this is related to the retail. And I don't know that it particularly matters, especially because I think the way the regs are now and the way they likely will be is that they'll be like medical in the sense that a commercial grow facility will be a vanilla building that doesn't have anything to it and is just another building. So I don't know if the growing or the manufacture or the testing necessarily need as big of a buffer from the schools as a retail.
Well, yeah, I don't think they need any
I don't
buffer.
think
Right, I mean, I don't know that, right, so I mean,
like
as
the way
it's
you're
written,
thinking.
as it's written now, everything in here has 350 foot
Oh,
buffer.
it's a cannabis establishment. I
And
see what
so,
you're saying.
to me, I don't know that it makes.
What are the ones that you would accept?
Well, I mean, I don't,
Well, a lot of those aren't allowed in downtown business anyways, correct?
Right.
right,
But it, I mean, an industrial zone, we do have a charter school.
right. And I think this also applies, or could be used to apply to the buffer from similar businesses. I think that the idea of not having retailer is different than having grow, where they're all three industrial buildings in an industrial zone.
Right.
Which is just another way to think about the buffers, but,
All right, we can change that from, so we make it 500 feet, right? We can change it.
right. So, I mean, and I think that is a point that's been brought up before, is that, you know, with the zoning, if you set it at 200 feet and someone builds there and then you decide you want to make it larger, you can't. And you could go the other direction. You could set it at 500 and then decide to relax it.
But each
But-
time we have to go through the same process again.
Right.
I mean, it's not, I don't want to make that seem like it's a small deal. It's not a small deal.
No, although I think Salem's right that, you know, this is more like the modification to the chicken coop bylaw that we're dealing with tomorrow, which isn't, I mean, this has been a pretty Herculean effort over the last months to do this. And again, a lot of it has been waiting for the state, but I don't think that it would necessarily be that long, but that's true. It's not something that we could do on a moment's notice.
Yeah, I think there'd be still a lot of very, very passionate people that would want to speak about a buffer zone.
Yeah.
That's been the primary
That's
thing
been the
we've
big issue,
hearing.
I agree.
So I don't want to go back. I want to make a decision and let it
Right.
stick with it.
I would agree with that.
Council can override us, that's fine.
Right.
But I don't want to go back and talk about this again. So I actually can't support 400 feet. I think that's silly, and no offense, but
No,
I'm just
I
talking out loud. I think it makes we started at 200, we compromised 350, we compromised to 400, then it's going to get to city council, we're going to compromise more. I think 350 is appropriate. I saw the map, the 500 foot makes no sense to me whatsoever. The 350 feet gives an option for businesses, retail businesses in town, to have a business. And I would propose 350, leaving it in and let the council hear from more people.
Certainly
And
get my
doing that
support.
for all uses?
For retail in downtown, I don't, like we talked about, I don't think that we're gonna have manufacturing and testing in downtown. That's gonna be out in the industrial. I think they're not even gonna be public spaces, right? So they're not gonna have storefronts,
It won't
right?
be
It's just
industrial.
gonna be industrial. So I don't see why that would even need a buffer, to be honest.
You can make that motion.
I think
I'll
it should be
second.
500 feet. And if it goes to the council, then the council can hear from the representatives in their different zones and their different precincts. They'll let them know what they feel about it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's up to us to make it 500, 350, whatever it is. We make it 500, we can always reduce it. They can reduce it at the council level.
They can increase it at the council
I will
level.
say this, when we put together the draft several months ago, there were several things that we sort of threw stuff in at the last minute as a placeholder. We were very clear we didn't want to do question marks or ranges. But some of these numbers were not numbers that we spent a whole lot of time deliberating or resolving on, and there's always that implication later, right? So I don't think it's worth it to just throw something out there and say city council's going to deal with it when we can actually, at least for our group of 5, say what we think is a reasonable buffer.
And I completely agree with that, which is why I think you're right. We should talk that now at length. We've been deliberating here. I mean, I think that there's absolutely a lot of thought that's going into this process. This isn't willy-nilly. And I think we don't want to leave question marks and blanks. We're the planning board. Our job is to talk about what we've been planning.
I just can't sit here and listen to the superintendent of schools and the Willis and everybody else come down and tell me they want 500 feet and just shove it under the rug. I just can't do that.
I understand.
Okay? I'm 74 years old, I went to school and everything else, I know 500 to 350 is nothing, I understand all that, but still, you got your superintendent of schools, you got the Willison, coming down here with their psychiatrists and everybody else, telling us they want 500 feet, and it's not that much of an ask, just the first year to make it 500. We can always take it down the following year to 350 if we had to. It's not that much to ask.
I don't want to put into your deliberation, but I will say that if you do go with 500, it almost excludes downtown business.
It does.
So
That's what that
as
maps
as looking, since you're the planning board, and you're the ones that are going to be approving these special permits. I mean, if it was your intention to exclude all of downtown business, then I think 500 feet makes sense. But if it was not your intention to exclude all of downtown business, then I don't. That's all I have to say.
Right, I mean, we've talked all along about the buffer, right?
Raise it up, yeah, okay.
There's the
I
whole
will do that.
concept of regulating things out of existence. But then there's also the flip side that I don't know that, I mean, I can see the arguments all across the spectrum for whether there's a need for a buffer, how big it should be. But whatever we think the buffer should be, I don't think we should do the reverse of regulating out of existence and say, well, I really believe that 500 is appropriate, but when I look at the map, no one could build there, so I'm willing to go to 250, right? So I get that we look at the real world application, but I don't know that that should drive us any more than we should be using the buffer to try to regulate things out of existence. The question has always been, what amount of a buffer is reasonable, either in your own opinion or as a way to make the community feel comfortable and moving forward?
I don't know.
Is there room for a place on Cottage Street with a 500-foot buffer, yes or no? Is there?
There are
Maybe a place, well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
you're part of it,
it's
too.
up for discussion.
Come on
Is there
in.
8 places? I mean, how many places on Union Street? If they do the math, we just
It would
had
be-
JP come up here last week and said there's all kinds of spots up there.
I think. You want to speak to it?
After you, it's fine.
I would say Union Street would be pretty much exclusively taken out. And Cottage Street would have probably,
5 or 6.
from Amy's place down
Like a third.
to the pond.
Right. And just on that side, because the other side's already has, well,
That's a big deal.
Let's see what Jeff's
Here's
got.
your
Yeah.
one storefront.
So I think this is a good debate, and I think that you're close to picking a number, and I think there are a couple factors. The counselor gave a series of maps here. I haven't looked at them yet, but it raises a point, which is if you were to pick a distance tonight, it could allow some additional evaluation of that distance in preparation for the city council to further evaluate it.
Yep.
So one of the things that is a lot of concern for me is that the maps have consistently shown property boundary to property
Right.
boundary. So you have not yet seen actual implications.
we need to
Maybe
go out
it's
and
been
measure it.
explored.
Yeah, I did.
By hand.
Yes,
So-
but no one else has that knowledge
Right.
in front of them, and you should. But if you picked 350, for example, it could allow the city council to have more detailed maps showing what door to door would look like, and I think that evaluation hasn't happened yet, and I think it could or should.
I don't think we're leaving here tonight without picking a buffer to at least propose.
Well, I think that makes sense, and I think what really is a point of clarification for me is the difference between door to door and property boundary to property boundary. There's
Or
a significant
building to
difference.
building.
Well, I think that it raises a question about door to door. I think I get it from a door of an establishment. If you have a cannabis establishment, you can measure from that entrance door or multiple entrance doors. But the door of one of these private or public schools is not clear. So I think that with regard to Williston in particular, they have multiple buildings and multiple doors, obviously. So I think
So it's
It's-
front entrance? of-
Or even the elementary
Like the-
schools, I mean,
the-
I just
Right.
assumed it was any of their doors. The
right.
nearest
Well,
one.
that is. I think that raises something to at least be aware of in mapping is which
Right.
type of which type of public educational or private educational facilities are you talking about?
Well, clearly this is much easier when you're talking about our elementary schools.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
I think that's where we should focus.
well, also the door-to-door part is hard because the door is a movable destination, right? I mean, you can determine where you place the door on your cannabis establishment on the other side of the building. But like it's a little more malleable than a property line or even a building-to-building measurement.
Well, a lot of towns have had done building to building the closest point of a building A to building B, the closest point drawn on a straight line. I mean, that's different than the line of the path of travel, but some other municipalities have drawn the straight line. The path of travel introduces the concept of potentially the entrance.
Right,
And
but
I
path
think,
of
Jeff,
travel
the
also
reason-
makes more sense with the concern that's been raised about a buffer,
And
which is the
people
exposure. I
walking
mean,
by.
so
Travel throughout
it's the
that.
natural go-to if you're worried about people being exposed to something.
Yeah.
Then
It also-
it's the path of travel that's going to expose them to it.
Jeff, it also, one of the reasons the path of travel was discussed early on was the sort of complex issues that the mill buildings offer, right? So it was like,
Right.
can I open one that's upstairs?
Exactly.
And it may, be 15,000 feet away, but it's really only 3 feet from my ceiling to your floor. And so like that was sort of, and I mean, maybe when it gets to council, it needs to be a different standard for a mill building than it is for the rest of it and a different measurement. And that may be the way to get around it. But I think that was why the building to building didn't work
Yep.
in a mill complex.
That makes sense to me.
And I don't know, I mean, I think the language as it's written right now, the doorway to doorway is really vague and it needs to be filled in a lot. And I don't know that it works necessarily everywhere, like in every different zone and with every different building, but I think any of the other stuff, either property line to property line or building to building, eliminates the mills, and that's, I think, always been seen as a pretty big area where this kind of thing could succeed.
Agreed.
So, I mean, I think that probably we keep it doorway to doorway in this context would be my,
Path of travel. I mean, we could focus on some of the specific words that we're stumbling on. Which door? Also pedestrian, I heard, maybe you brought up, Jeff,
Yeah.
was it the pedestrian or driven traffic? Maybe we could just settle on pedestrian right now, adding pedestrian in.
pedestrian travel.
a typical pedestrian path of travel.
Typical,
Bam, there's one down.
Um,
Can I just say a couple other, because I know the buffer issue has been a significant point of conversation. The general guidance thus far is that municipalities should not go over 500 because there's a question as to whether that would be in conflict with the regulation. So you're thinking 500 or less. It does clearly say you could go less. That is something that is authorized.
So that was another thought I had, is that it raises the issue that we don't really know when they say 500 or less, they don't tell us how they're measuring.
Right.
So if we use a different metric and we say 250, but they're doing a different metric, the 250 could be more than 500.
Right.
It's hard, so like that's part of the problem with this language, is that I'm hoping that's one of the things that they'll clarify in the final regs, because we're using here and you don't want to, if you go over, you may end up having none, or you'd have the 500.
I don't think
You may
that'll
have-
be an issue, because as point to point is as the crow flies, that'll always be a more direct line, so that we would never cross that.
Okay. Two other items is, just for reference, the medical marijuana bylaw does have this separation, the buffer as 200 feet. But I do want to just identify that when that was being crafted, it was really confined to two districts, the industrial and the mill industrial. So the buffer was probably less of a significant issue then. Just as a preface to that discussion of 200 was, it was isolated to those districts that really don't have schools, except for a limited.
We mirrored that. That's how we came up with
Yep.
200.
Yeah.
We were there.
We
Yep,
were
no,
there.
good.
But we also from the draft ordinance, we also changed it. We reduced it because the recommendation was 500, if you
Right.
remember.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
we did modify that.
Okay. Yep. And then the last thing, just, I think I said this at an earlier meeting that I was able to attend, was that there's a lot of questions about the purpose of a buffer, but I think from the municipal perspective and the planning board's perspective, it's really important to remind that it's a zoning tool. So that's really one of the primary reasons why it's being brought up, is because it's a zoning tool. It's one of the only tools that a municipality has to talk about proximity of uses. Zoning has often been called like a blunt item, whereas licensing and other issues are like a precision knife. So you're dealing with something that's pretty clunky. It gives you only a certain set of tools to deal with. So what I would think is important for all the boards to consider when talking about a buffer is things like traffic, parking, the potential for tourism. So a lot of what I've heard and you've heard is heartfelt feelings about people who live in town, and I think that's great. But you do need to have an expectation that for at least the early stages of this retail, especially use, there will be draw from other places. So if you think about buffers to help mitigate potential impacts of traffic congestion, people standing outside, and that's an issue that relate to buffer that is not intended at all to be prejudicial or derogatory. It's just the actual impact is people, and it's not the type of people, it's just them coming and going, and that's one of the purposes of buffers.
Not
And-
usually from a school. In that case, it would be from each other usually.
Right. And it's one of the only tools. So just to put my final point on it is that outside of the buffer or without a buffer, you have very little control over when an applicant comes in. You have very little control to say, no, this isn't the right location. So the buffer gives you that guaranteed area where you don't have to grapple with saying no. Outside of the buffer, the planning board will have very little authority to judge an application on other merits other than traffic congestion, because they will likely be able to meet odor mitigation measures. They'll be likely to meet many of the other requirements. So you'll have very little opportunity to actually say no outside of the buffer. So if you think about the buffer as just that insulated area, whatever the distance, it is not intended to be used in a prejudicial way. It's just one of the only tools that a town has in terms of zoning. So that was
and I
just
just
to
wanna-
have that armed with you for future discussions.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you, Jeff, for reminding us. This is about how we place and where we place these businesses. And I would just say, I just want to put it out there that the bigger the buffer, the less space there is for a business. And you have to remember we're talking about downtown business now. This is one of the only areas in our city that supports retail and is walkable and bikeable. And I think as we talk about congestion, I think Jeff brings up a great point. We really want to limit the areas where people can actually walk to these places and walk home, or ride their bike, or whatever means of transportation they take besides a car. From a planning perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I think as we look at green communities, as we look at smart growth, you know, walking and biking to businesses is, you know, one of the things that's, you know, held up as a gold standard.
One of the reasons we're doing complete streets.
Yeah, especially as we're doing complete streets. You know, I mean, I think that, so we also, this is a tool. How do we want to use that tool? I think that's an important question.
It's clear this is where we want these businesses, and one of the places.
One of the places.
Can I pass this down? It was just submitted. The green is.
The green is the DB zone.
Are we taking comments?
No, I just
Yeah.
want. Yeah, I just wanted to get clarity. It's not. It's not indexed. So
That's okay.
green is
we'll,
the.
we'll just take it and
Okay.
we'll
I
figure
just
it
want
out.
to make sure that goes in.
And the blue is the Mill Industrial District, and there are
All right.
plenty of places
So the green it shows properties that are.
that are available within
And-
the 500-foot buffer.
And you had said building to building measurement.
I actually did pretty much.
Green is available.
Can we
door
go-
to
Green-
door.
Can we go back to
Green
working
is
on the
downtown
verbiage?
business.
We
Yeah.
added
And
pedestrian.
Let's
And
deal with the door
available.
definition.
Perfect.
Mill industrial.
I love
And
this.
available.
Yes.
Okay.
So nearest door.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I think,
Nearest door to nearest door. So
I think it may influence where people put doors in
Well,
their
I
new
thought
buildings,
about
but
that. I imagine, you know, a
So-
business, a school saying, well, we don't want that shop near us, they're coming in, so we are going to tear down a wall and build a door on this
Well, I
corner
think-
of our
or
building.
the flip side, right? It depends on who you're afraid of here. The flip side is that you open up a retail establishment, you put your door on the far side.
Well, do you want it to be?
Oh, that's-
Would you want it to be primary entrance or primary entrances? Because doors would be
I'd rather
secondary
like-
means of egress. It could be an emergency exit door that no
Great,
one
but
ever
what does
uses.
that mean to a high school or a kindergarten? I mean, do they have do they have multiple primary
They may have
entrances?
They may have multiple primary entrances, but at least you're covering the primary entrance.
And so if let's say you're building a new building, because I think the schools are relatively fixed where they are and where their doors are for the most part, but if I were to build a new retail establishment, can I determine myself as the applicant, which is my main entrance?
Well, luckily, I think in that case there are CCC regulations in terms of entrance.
Yeah.
They have to have handicapped accessibility. They have to be lit, so they're gonna if they have a step or they'd have to convert to a ramp. So there would be some some limitations as to where people could just
So
put in
nearest
a primary
primary
entrance.
entrance is a suggestion. But do we need a definition then for what a primary entrance is? Who defines what primary is?
Well, at some point, we're gonna be, as
Will they
the
get
planning
mail?
board, well, no, at some point, as the planning board, we will determine what is the nearest primary
As part of our
entrance.
deliberation.
As
As part
part
of
of their
That's good enough.
application. I mean, some of this is language that we'll just have to.
All right, I'm good with nearest primary
Apply.
entrance.
Okay, so now we have it measured by a typical pedestrian path of travel from the nearest primary entrance to the nearest primary entrance. Now, we've put off everything other than the number as long as we can on this one, folks.
I suggest, because we're having trouble and it seems like we're split down the middle, that we leave it at what the city council sent to us and just don't modify it. Kick it back to them and let them fix it. They gave it to us at 350, kick it back at that.
Well, there are 5 of us, so we're not split down the middle, right?
I don't know
We-
yet.
Well, I mean,
Just take
we
it.
can't be split down the
You had
middle.
I propose to maintain it at 350.
Well, we got 3 for
Okay,
350.
so Chris has a motion to leave
second.
the 50. You got a second? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. All right.
So again, just to reiterate, there's people in the audience. So that is the measurement and language that's going to the city council.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, B. So B has a couple issues here. No cannabis establishment shall be located within a building containing residential units except mixed-use buildings in the mill industrial and the downtown business zoning. Is everyone comfortable with that exception so that you could have a cannabis business in a building in the mill industrial or downtown business with a residence in it?
Yes, so the way this is written, there is no cannabis establishment allowed where there's a residence in the same building.
Right.
Correct.
Except in the mill industrial and downtown business.
Downtown business, sorry, mill industrial.
No
Okay,
industrial downtown.
that's acceptable.
I'm okay.
Harry, thoughts?
Well, why should bed and breakfast be exempt?
Well, so that's the second one, so I'm just doing the first sentence for now.
Okay.
So, any issues with an exception for mill industrial and downtown business? No? Okay. So we don't need to change that. Prohibition includes transient housing or group housing. Anybody have any objections or thoughts about that?
I don't even know why it's in it.
We haven't talked about transient housing in months.
I know, let's go
Can I
back
ask
to it, can't we?
what the thinking was?
I believe
I have
that
no idea.
was language that I got from, I thought it was you guys.
Did we put it in there?
I think so.
Might be
I
in
wanna
God,
say,
I don't
I
remember
want to
that
say
at
that
all.
comes from the medical
Yeah.
regs,
It comes from medical, I believe.
but I could be wrong.
So it got lifted.
So,
Okay.
so describe what that even means. This prohibition includes transient housing. So if you,
So like on Pleasant Street, what are they called? They're not called boarding houses, are they?
I think what it's basically saying is that, so for residential units, we don't have hotels or motels, right?
Right,
So
right.
the other ways we have people living there that may not reside there is you could have transient or group housing where it's not necessarily your residence,
Residence, I see.
but you're staying there long term. And then we
You can't
also have
open
bed
a-
and breakfasts,
and you can't open a marijuana retail establishment in there.
right?
Yeah, like at Vikings.
Right.
Landing or
That seems so
something.
simple. All right.
I mean, you can,
I
no,
see-
what
I
it
have no
says
issue
is
with
it treats it like a residence. So I
Yeah.
think this says you would still be able to in mill industrial downtown business. But in any of the
Yeah.
other zones, you would treat those as though they were residences, even though it's not someone who is permanently residing there and getting their mail there. They are living there for all intents and purposes, so we treat it like a residence.
At some point, someone considered this, but I have no issue with it. It's fine the way it
Yeah, I
is.
mean,
So then, okay, so then the third one is bed and breakfasts are exempt from this regulation.
Sounds good.
so they can't. You can own a bed and
I
breakfast
think
and
Harry
sell pot.
wants to weigh in on this one.
I
No, I just don't understand.
I don't either. have
I
no
mean, I
idea.
think the idea would be,
Right, I think,
the
but,
concept might be an
I
actual
think
business
it's
that
one of the
is,
fastest growing emerging
I mean,
cannabis businesses.
no, what's that?
This is one of the fastest growing emerging cannabis businesses.
It's actually
Bed and
true.
breakfast and
Yeah.
cannabis.
Yeah.
So you're saying, so.
That would be more inclusive
There,
than
it
the social
feels like there's
consumption
like a
stuff,
double
right?
negative in here.
Yeah.
So-
I'm having
So
a
I don't
problem
know.
with it, too.
Maybe-
So,
maybe I
bed
just-
and breakfasts are exempt from this regulation, meaning
They
you
can be
open
established.
and
But-
sell,
But there's no,
Can't-
since social consumption is
Largely
being
social,
delayed.
though, right? Yeah.
but could
That
you sell
is-
it in the gift shop?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Like, how do you sell it? How do you sell marijuana or cannabis?
Maybe you
at a
can
bed and
say
breakfast?
bed and breakfasts
If
are
you're
not
licensed,
considered
like
Like a hot mint
residential
on the
for this
pillow or
use.
something? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would
Is
hazard.
it-
I would
is it
hazard
worth
to
it
guess.
for
I would hazard to
clarity?
guess that it was based on cannabis establishment being generally defined as a group under it, and I
Yeah.
think the social consumption was definitely. We've all heard kind of the yoga,
Right.
massage,
Like, that seems very
bed and
logical. So is
breakfast.
it
I
worth
think
it
it
to
was.
strike this last sentence
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
thought that that would be
Well,
part of a
until we
social
get-
consumption?
until we get social
Right, it would be
consumption.
part of a social
Now, is
consumption
transient
bylaw.
housing and group housing also social consumption?
Is there-
No.
No.
That's just like treating it like an apartment building
Yeah.
as though it was residence. Okay. Harry, do you have any objection to that?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
Get rid of bed and breakfast.
All right. C is the limit on retail sales storefronts. I guess we can split, we've stricken the social consumption section from this already.
Right. So we're only talking about the first two sentences of this section.
And remember, these numbers are based on, the idea that social consumption was going to be coming online at the same time.
Right. Okay, so we've got, I guess there's two issues here. There's 4 in the first year, and 1 in the second year, and 1 in the third year.
This language has changed since our last meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
From the input,
So-
that we
We
got.
got 6
Yeah.
over 3 years. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yep.
So it says no more than 4 cannabis retail sales storefronts shall be allowed within the city in the first year, July 1st, 2018.
So are we saying the year starts July 1st?
Yes.
So maybe we add the word starting July 1st there? Starting July 1st, 2018?
Yeah, I think,
Starting?
starting July 1st.
Instead of the first year.
Instead of
we
just
start-
saying-
Or maybe call it the fiscal year.
Fiscal year, yeah,
Fiscal
that would
year.
make more sense to me.
Starting
City,
the
first
fiscal year.
But I believe July 1st was used because of the issuing of licenses.
Issuing.
Yeah, that's when the license
Yeah.
date comes.
All right, so just starting
I think-
July 1st.
Yeah, so in the first year, starting July 1st, 2018?
So starting is within the parentheses.
Yeah.
An additional 1 retailer shall be allowed the second year, and we should say starting July
Starting.
1st, 2019, and 1 retailer in the third year, starting July 1st, 2020.
Right, so then the issue becomes the number
Yep,
for each one.
okay. So 4 establishments is, for the first year, is less than 50% of the alcohol storefronts.
Right? Or is, depending on if it was 8 or 9, but yeah.
Right,
It's
or
at
is
least, it's at
50%.
least 50, yeah.
Let's try to look at this, I think, in terms of just talking about these kinds of businesses, so we can stew on what this might actually look like. You might actually have one that's actually providing cannabis, like a dispensary sort of thing, where they're handing out. what other kinds of retail shops might there be that we're limiting in this? I mean, we've talked about so many, even up to and including, trucks and things like that. Are there?
Trucks?
Well, like drive-up trucks or even events, and which I saw you put in as a special thing that's different. Other than now that we've got rid of social consumption, are there any businesses that anyone can think of where it isn't just a dispensary
No.
for retail?
We're just talking
I don't think so.
dispensaries
It's
now.
just, I think a retailer is just
It's just
selling,
I mean, there's nothing else now. We've
right,
eliminated-
marijuana or marijuana
That's
products.
painful.
Yep.
I mean, you could have a,
Someone think of something.
Does
is there, does the micro business count? I mean,
Yeah.
where it's fully integrated? Are they
No,
allowed to?
it's just, because it's just cultivation, manufacture, and delivery, but it's not,
We can
there's
write out
no,
the farmer's
there's
market.
no
Is delivery still
retail.
up?
I mean, they could still, I mean, they could be, things like kitchens and the manufacturer,
when I
those
saw delivery,
those
I
might be
meant
components, they
delivery.
still have to follow
It's
their
still
own
delivery
zoning for it, but
retail.
this is just the retail
Because, like,
component. And retail component really is just distributing cannabis, there's nothing else to it now that the social consumption's gone, I can't think of a single thing.
Right. It's just gonna be the sale of cannabis and cannabis products.
Okay.
May I?
Please.
Since we have a year before the social consumption regs may or may not come out, we might not want to go into the third year with a specific thing, only because we may want to increase that when we get to the social consumption phase. And if we lock it down in here to, and let's say that doesn't happen, I would like it to be higher than 1.
Right.
If social
Potentially.
consumption doesn't happen.
If social consumption doesn't happen.
That makes sense.
Are you
So-
suggesting 4 and 2 is a better?
4 and 2, and then don't say anything about the third year until we know more.
Yeah.
I'm
I
fine
mean,
with
the
that.
flip side is
I'm
4
good.
too few, if social consumption never happens,
Yeah.
to start with.
Or
Well,
4.
right.
Right,
So
right.
maybe 5 and.
You still come out
Right,
with
you
a
start
number.
with 5.
I 4. I think 4 is good.
I
for
think
first
4 is
year.
plenty for the
Yeah,
first
4
year
is
as
fine.
well. I mean,
Just to forget to.
You have to think about Jackie Duda having to do all this too. I mean,
Yeah,
so I, mean,
yeah.
I think 4 is reasonable for cannabis. For
I
the first
motion to
year.
modify it to be 4 in 2018, beginning of July 1st, and 2 on July 1st, 2019, and strike July
Strike
1st, 2020.
is there a second?
I'll second that.
He can second it.
All right, Harry gets it.
Harry gets the second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, so you guys, so it's
2,
4,
4 and 2.
it's 4 and 2, okay.
And nothing in 2020.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then I guess the one, just for clarity, that last sentence in C references delivery. I think the delivery is in the same boat as the on-site consumption, right? So we
Correct.
should strike that
Strike that whole
reference.
rest of everything, yep.
Agreed.
Do we want to have a cap? We did talk,
Is there, do we have a section?
Last sentence.
well, yeah. we
Number of
talked-
licenses, brick and mortar. And
Oh,
primary
yeah,
social
okay, I
consumption
struck
we
that
covered as
already.
well.
Yeah, I struck it too, and then I
So,
realized
okay,
that-
so the number of licenses for brick and mortar and primary use social consumption will be capped at 12. So what we want to strike out primary social consumption, so it would be, what it really is
The number of retail
cannabis
licenses?
retailer. So the number of
retail.
cannabis retailer licenses will be capped at blank.
I motion to make that change.
So what's the change?
What's the blank, though?
12.
Jim,
12.
oh, okay.
That's a lot.
I think that's a lot too.
That was our original number that we all talked about. What's the matter with that?
That was exactly what I thought about, though, was the
40
last number we threw in as we got it out the door to go to city
49
council.
places you can get alcohol.
That's
Where's
not
the
even
parity in
wrong with
that? It's got a lot to
No,
do
it
with it.
doesn't.
Well, but
That's not
also,
parity.
but also
That's
8
reason
or,
for
but you
lawsuits.
set aside the social consumption,
it's
so what it actually is
49
8 or
bars.
9.
Yeah.
Right, so it's 8 or 9 package stores.
It's package store, right? There's
But
8
they
or
can't
9
even have
package
bars.
stores. So if we're saying that you can sell 8 or 9 places to buy alcohol and bring it home,
What's the number you would propose?
I wouldn't go above 9. I mean, that's the amount of
I would agree with that.
bars we have.
I mean,
We
I
have
think-
bars,
It's an awful lot of
alcohol
places.
sales places.
I think if we're doing 4 and 2 already in the first 2 years,
Yeah, so
Jesus.
that's 3
Yeah.
more.
This is,
So it would be,
this
that
is
just
just
means it would be
these are
3
just
more in
retailers.
perpetuity.
At some point after 2019.
well, and there's also presumably, once someone leaves, there'll be open slots kind of thing.
Well, I think if by striking the third year component, in your discussion of 4 the first year, 2 the second year, doesn't that sort of cap it at 6?
No.
No, because.
No, the idea is that
After
those
that,
will
you
only
could
be
do
limited
3
there,
and
and then it'll be unlimited after that.
Oh, that's a good
We
point,
got
yeah.
Yeah.
our stuff together by that point, so we
Yeah,
can
we'll know what we're doing.
process stuff.
It's, I think the concept with the original language was it was gonna be phased in, and then after that 2-year or 3-year period, then it would be as many as we agree is the cap.
That's the cap, right. So we don't have 9 or 8 happen in the first year, and then we're all running around.
And then after the third or fourth year, if we get a ton of people coming at us and we're safe, the kids are fine, there's no evidence, and we're seeing money coming in, and everyone says, hey, let's do more of those, then we do more of this, I would live with 9, because that gets us to where we need to get at that point. So I'd be willing to flex and meet you guys at 9.
I propose 9.
Before you jump to 9, I just want to, I found it. This is information 2017, which I was told that should be relatively the same for license renewals and things, and there are 8. I'm just putting that back out there where there may be an opportunity for 9.
Sorry,
I think
could you
it was
restate
when
that? I
when
just wanna make sure I understood it.
When True Beer left.
There are 8 packages.
Okay.
But what about
There's
the
still a
9?
license though.
So the way it works is that you have
You're killing me, Jeff.
you have a
should know all of this by now.
You
It's
have
day
a
2.
category for all alcohol package stores, and there are 4 allowed licenses, and they're all issued. So that's, well, I won't read them. There's 4 all alcohol, and then there are wine and malt package stores, which there are allowed 5.
Okay.
There are 8 issued. So I just want, I just,
8, but there could be 9.
there's, right, and so I was just raising the point because if you were a different town looking at the 20%, the interpretation has been licenses issued.
Okay.
Can I just raise a
So
point? real
I
quick?
guess you have 9 allowed. I think that is probably a good benchmark to use because it could go, you could get that additional 1
Right.
package store and you would be up to 9.
Right. So I have no problem with 9, but I just want to throw out there that we do have 3 breweries which are allowed to not only do they serve but they also sell. So
On
that's
top of
that's a
that.
place where you
True.
can go and buy beer and take it away.
Mm.
I just wanted to point that out. So this isn't true parity.
All right, yeah,
I
good
totally
point.
forgot about those. Fine.
Don't marijuana shop just sell marijuana? That's the only thing they sell, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
All right, what does a package store sell?
No, that's not true actually. Yeah.
What do package stores sell besides beer and wine? What do they sell? Potato chips, all kinds of stuff, right? Cigarettes, lottery
A cannabis
tickets.
store could sell that too, and probably
Yeah.
it would probably be
So
profitable.
when you're talking about a package store compared to a marijuana shop, it's not even the same kind of animal when you really think about it.
Well, I
Most
think it is
dispensaries
because
I've heard of aren't doing much.
They're not selling
of
lottery
that.
tickets and
Lottery
pizza at a
tickets.
lottery, at a marijuana
Cannabis?
shop.
No.
They might
Gamble-
have buttons.
gambling's definitely
Do
more
we have
dangerous.
anyone who knows the actual answer to this? Because I thought they could only sell marijuana products.
Yeah, I don't think they
Or
can sell
cannabis
it.
products.
But
Jeff?
cannabis-related products. I mean,
You
I
can
think that
oil
they could
and-
sell
Related, yeah.
Yeah.
lotions. They
Edibles.
could probably sell
Pipes.
pipe,
Oil.
Right.
paraphernalia.
Paraphernalia.
Right.
Yeah.
Clothing.
Yeah.
Oh, clothing, yeah.
You're doing a
Okay.
great job holding back, I see.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
manufacture
No,
does make.
well, no more. Thank you, though. Okay. So what's your point again, Harry? You think that they're
No, the only point I was trying to make was a point of survival. A package store can survive not just by selling beer and wine. They sell other things to keep them in business, where a regular marijuana shop is basically selling just marijuana, where she says that they're selling clothes, right? Let's just said, probably jewelry maybe, something like that.
Well, I
I
think
mean-
I think there's
Well, maybe
something
they
there
are,
just
I
to be
don't-
aware of. I think
Yeah,
member Zarvis was kind of what other retail types of uses could you imagine, and you should potentially imagine 60% of revenue from something and 40% from retail cannabis, because the difference between the difference between the recreational law is that a retail place does not need to be vertically integrated anymore. So a retail shop, and the licensing fees are significantly lower than medical. So you could get people who want to purchase some product from a manufacturer and sell small amounts and have other retail components. So I just want to
Okay.
be clear that that
Question.
could.
I
So
think
that's
the
more of
other
like
thing that-
convenience store model.
Jim.
Yeah.
It's closer to a package store.
So I have a question. Hetty's down in town right now, they sell tobacco products, and they have a ton of other things in their shop. CBD. Could they petition for a license and still sell marijuana, but also have all these other products in their store?
Yes.
They could, right?
Yeah.
Yes, as long they would have to change the exterior of their building a little bit.
right?
I think
And
the
they'd have to
buffer,
move.
yeah, would eliminate their.
But so I think the other thing with the cap to think about is that with the language we've just put in here, no one's going to run into this cap until you got 6 by July 1st of 2020 already, and then you have 2 more after that. So it's not like a pressing thing that is gonna be an emergency, like, that we have to deal with, like, which I think sort of cuts both ways, but in my mind, it cuts more on a lower cap and the feeling that, like, as we see this develop over the next 2 years with 6, and then 2 more, we can see what happens with those if we need to expand it. I mean, I think that the idea that any of us know how many we can accommodate here, and that we won't be able to move with this and increase it if we need to.
It's pretty clear
I
with
mean, there's
social
none
consumption.
now. There's none. You know, I mean, there's none. We're gonna go to 8 or 8 or 9. I mean, don't you think that'd be sufficient? From 0 to 9?
That's a small number to me. That's too
So
few.
would you propose less, Harry?
No, not less than 8 or 9. I just can't. That's probably a good, fairly good number, I would think. You know, I'm just trying to make a point. We're going from nothing to 9.
Yeah.
All right, so-
Can I ask your opinion on something, just as a planning board, and this is kind of uncharted territory, though, because I guess other than liquor licenses, there's really no industries with caps placed on them. Is that correct? Would there be a way? Let's just say whenever we impose the cap, do you feel typically that with a cap imposed, do businesses that are interested still come forward, express their interest in opening a business? In other words, do you get almost like a lobbying from? In other words, let's say we impose a cap of 9. Let's just say that. If that cap's filled, do you usually get expressed interest from businesses that still would want to open?
Planner gets all that.
Right.
Well,
So,
also
and
there's
I
no
mean,
other caps,
what I'm just
so-
saying is, like, is there a way to gauge really what the interest is in going above that cap
First couple of
ultimately?
years will tell that.
Yeah.
Remember, there's no cap on gas stations, and we're not like swimming in gas stations.
Usually what happens
Yeah,
Right,
is
but
that
we're also starting from 0. We're like, so none of us have any idea what the market is, right? So like the
Right.
gas
Well, I mean,
station
you know
stuff
what-
has
you
been
know
a little
what's
more
you know what's a good
organic.
comparison is tattoo shops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
more
because those were
Colorado or
against the law.
Washington or California, or I mean, there's
Yeah.
lots of precedents, and our numbers way too low. I just don't get why you're looking at these ridiculous numbers
No, he's got
under
a
a
good
dozen
point.
and saying
No, he's got
that's
a
a
good
big
point.
that's a big number. It's not big. It's small.
There is
And
there is some.
and it is only on this
We're not
type of
that
business,
big.
which concerns me just a little bit.
Well, and alcohol, right? I mean, that's the other
I
one
mean,
that we've dealt with.
But we also, you know, it was interesting how we did not have a giant community debate on the 8 over quota licenses we got last year.
Yeah.
That was 8 in 1 year, 8 all at once, in addition to the 40 that we had.
But so that's what I imagine happening here, is that I
Well,
think
can
we'll
you
be able to
petition?
see in 2 years how this goes, and we'll be able to, I mean, the city council and the planning board will look at it and say, like, people keep coming to us and saying we need more licenses.
That's my question.
Or no one does.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So like, I think it'll be very easy to respond to that, and I think because
I
we
agree.
already have really a 3-year window here, because we're really, if we do it 8 or 9, we've got 4, 2, 3, or 2. Like that's a lot, I think, of time, if not a lot of retailers, but a lot of time to see, is this not enough for the market? Is it plenty? Are we okay?
Because
Or
I
frankly, to say, boy, this is crazy with 4, and we'll have time to stop at the other 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever. So,
Yeah.
so to me, I think that because we're rolling this out slowly,
I agree.
we can be a little more responsive to the community and the market and the
I
city.
motion to adjust the cap to 9.
And so again, so I guess you feel that there's adequate forum for input from prospective business owners. Like, they're not just going to say, oh, well, there's already 9, like, I'm not even interested. They'll come forward
I
and,
mean, I
like,
think with alcohol
petition to-
licenses,
okay.
that's definitely been true, right?
Okay.
There's been
I just-
pressure to
that's
get
all I
over
wanted to
quota.
know.
It's been people, and you get people come in, and it's, I mean, there's a secondary market for alcohol licenses in a lot of places, so
Right.
that's a little different, but so, I mean, I think that we'll be able to respond to this. I don't think this number is really that crucial at this point, because it will be 3 years before we come up against it anyway.
Well, and the thing I don't want to interrupt your deliberations, but the thing I've been saying all along is this is a twofold issue. One is addressing community concern, and the other is making sure we develop sustainable business. Because
Yeah.
if we allow too many businesses to open at once, it creates a competition that, you know, half of these businesses could close in the first year.
Agreed.
We want to nurture these businesses as parts of the community.
I agree. I think that's one of the reasons for a cap and for a slow rollout, is that it hopefully gets more serious applicants who don't have to deal with 50 businesses that are competing with them in the first 6 months because everyone's trying to get in the door. I think that is a definite side benefit to that.
True, but I would say that on the flip side to this coin is the reason why we went for 8 over quota licenses, which was economic development. I think it, you know, being too restrictive, we're gonna limit the number of retail spaces in Easthampton that are empty now that could be filled and back on the tax rolls and providing jobs. And I think that we should be cautious, you know, especially as we move into area, you know, a place where we might need to have more tax revenue, to limit that at this critical time. So, you know, I'm fine with the numbers that we have here, but I just want to,
I
I
personally
had to say
think.
that.
I think we'll be able to roll with this and change,
I think,
be responsive.
honestly, we're a small city. I think 12 establishments. What else do we have besides bars that are 12?
Pizza places, salons.
I
I don't think we have.
I think, but I
We
think,
like our hair.
Chris, I
We
think the
like
thing
our
is,
hair.
like, that may very well turn out to be too low of a number, right? I don't think we know, but I think we'll be able, in 2 years, to look around and say, we've got 6.
Chinese
We're allowed to
food,
have 3 more in
pizza
the,
places.
in the future. Maybe we need to open up more licenses and change it. I don't know.
When I was in Denver, if I overlay Easthampton square footage over Denver, there weren't 9 places that were available
Right.
to sell marijuana, cannabis. There weren't. I mean, I walked around and I visited them, and I looked at them on the map. I looked to find them so I could go visit them for this exact research. So I think that 9 seems very reasonable.
Okay, so Jim, I think you actually moved for that. So we have a motion to cap the number of cannabis retail licenses at 9.
I'll second that.
All right, Chris with a second. All in favor?
Aye.
I had a question, and I wanted you to vote first, so the number's there. Just, I don't know that it needs to be codified in the zoning, but I was thinking about your questions about how would you know the demand for a license, and I just want to put out there on the table for, as the city planner, as a primary person who's going to be responding to people, I just wanted to have a little quick discussion about, for the first year, to the second year, and then up to 9 for the third year. How would you envision those people potentially applying day 1 for a license in year 2? So if, I guess it would be if the first 4 get issued special permits, they are then off the,
So what do you do with the other 2?
yes,
Or
and when
the
would
other
they
12?
apply, and when would they come to the planning board and things
I
like
think I
that?
can get right in line.
Yeah.
Well, would they have to apply on July 1 of 19, or could they apply in March of
Yes,
19?
I think that's precisely my
Yeah.
question, is when would they apply
they're
if they were
on hold.
looking to get a license for a year 2 allotment? I
And
just
how
wanna,
would you decide if there was a line at your door of people who are jostling and there's 12 of them on day
well,
1?
I believe that that's why the submission of a complete application to the CCC is just
Right.
inherent in being a starting point, and the issuance of their license point before the planning board. I think that is your, because relying solely on the market to dictate how many could have varying results. But if you are at least having the CCC as a application and their license issued, it queues up the people
Yeah, it
who
does.
are ready. So I
still have concerns about that. I mean, I honestly see the wisdom, and I love having tools when we're here to protect the city. Again, I don't think this is really much of a protection issue, but I think it's important to have these tools. But that I still see that chicken and an egg in there. I love the idea of having the application, and there's already language that we have in here that they have to, before they can run the business, they have to have gone through all the necessary licensing with the CCC.
But I think it's
But
going
that
to
CCC
be,
can change a lot of stuff that's in that original application, I think. And so the advantage here is then they come back and we see what the final proposal is, and we've got our window to approve it.
But that's what I mean, I don't think we came to resolution on that.
right, well, that's kind of why I raised it now, because I think it relates to the numbers and how there would be some moderation of it. It would potentially give the planning board that one item that would have to be achieved before they grant the special permit. So I just want to keep that on the table, at
Can I
least for
ask a quick
consideration.
question?
Yeah.
So one of the things I read, the survey that our committee got back from communities that had approved medicinal marijuana, one of the respondents talked about the value of a letter of intent, basically, from people that wanted to open cannabis businesses in their community. They called it a non-compete, which makes me think that they were saying that they wouldn't compete with, I don't know exactly, maybe this is a planning tool that I don't know about, but it was basically, it seemed like they were talking about a letter of intent from an applicant that described the project and also kind of detailed what they would be willing to do for the community, and they were choosing on a merit-based system. Somehow, I don't know if that's a thing,
Well-
but I read it in the survey.
Yeah.
So
I think it introduces a different option for like a license lottery, or so I believe it was Worcester set out a request for proposals.
Right.
RFP, yeah.
Right, and it's just not going to work within this timeline or this framework, but it might be something that could be revisited. But that would be a different structure. I think you would have to have it in regulation, some of that structure.
I just didn't know if there was some magic letter that planners used.
All right, we're talking about number, and through that, you're asking a question about how are you going to manage the process. We just sort of did our vote, and as part of that process, you're bringing us back to the need to have the CCC application completed when it comes before us.
That's step one, and I think there was agreement on that. It sounded like.
Can we just hammer that out as to whether we're going to do that or not? Because I'm confused. My understanding is that they have to check a box that says that they apply to, that they've conformed to the zoning in the municipality. How can we get the completion from them when they depend on us to get the completion?
They're not tied to each other. The compliance with zoning, from what I heard, and maybe there'll be more clarity in the regulations, but hearing the commissioner explain the purpose of the compliance letter is just to show that the location is going to be compliant with buffers, because they have requirements to show that, but it doesn't require that a
So
special
you're saying
permit be
they'll
granted.
be able to say they have compliance before they've come
We
before our
actually
board?
send a letter, the city has to write a letter with that application that just says, basically, you could put this project here if everything else works out.
If they go
So
through
it's
our
far enough
planning
away from a
process.
school, it's far away from another business, it's
Meets
in a
traffic
zone that we allow it
requirements,
in,
meets
it's
So
not a
they're-
residential
And
building.
that's something you would do.
Their license, or the mayor,
The mayor.
the CCC's license will be issued regardless of whether a special permit has been applied for or granted or not. So that's why I propose this concurrent path, because the CCC will go about their business, and within 90 days they will issue or deny their license, and the denial criteria is not whether or not they have a special permit.
Right.
It's
So
whether
that-
they conform to the zoning.
Whether they're
Well, I mean,
compliant
another
with, some of the language is compliance with local zoning, which is read to not be granting of a special permit, but compliance, like,
Okay, that helps.
available to apply.
And then also, I think if things change in the project before the commission, we would still be able to have some oversight of the final proposal that's gonna be built, instead of signing off on their proposal that goes to the commission before they end up changing things as that happens.
What does this do, just out of curiosity, imagining myself as an applicant now going through this process, and I get everything together, and I submit my application, I've I've gone to the city planner and requested this letter, you send it to the mayor, or you do it yourself, or however that's gonna work between the two of you, I don't know, and decide to give them a letter that they can put into their application and get it to the CCC. And then they have to go through that 90-day approval process plus everything else they put in here. Then they come before you again and say, I have my CCC stuff all put together. Can you please schedule a planning board meeting so I can get my special permit? Is that the flow?
There's another way, which would be that the application to the CCC is prepared. So these applicants are going to go through a lengthy process to prepare the application, and it has to be site specific. So they are going to have floor plans, they're going to have site plans that go to the CCC, and once it's deemed complete, then the city is notified and seeks that compliance letter, and that would open up the opportunity for them to apply to the planning board for the special permit process. 3 months is not that long, so the planning board would post the meeting 2 weeks later, they would hold their first public hearing, then the action of the planning board would be to continue for a month or two to allow the CCC to finish their process. The applicant comes back with their license, and then that would be one of the factual pieces of information that you have to issue the special permit.
I think that makes sense. I don't think it really, I mean, it moves the placement of the hearing for the special permit, but I don't think it adds an extra hoop.
The truth is, it doesn't stop the process. It does put a little bit more of a burden on the applicant, but it gives the city more safety.
I don't know that it does any more burden on the applicant either, though, because you're still gonna have that special permit
pushing
hearing.
times out just a little bit.
Well, but a lot of that can be, I mean, we can even have our special permit hearings during their 90-minute window, and all we're continuing is waiting for a decision,
Right.
but.
I mean, I agree overall. I agree.
How is this impacting what we're writing? Help me out.
So
Under this discussion.
We skipped ahead. We
He's
skipped
throwing a
ahead.
piece in. He's
Okay.
saying,
So
wait,
other
wait,
than-
guys, what you just voted on, how am I going to
Under
implement
other.
that?
Right.
So
But really,
So,
everything after,
So I think that
It's on the license requirement 10-10-6C.
So do we want to add that in, that a license requirement is required?
Yeah, there was language, I think,
That's
in Jeff's
under
memo.
other. And that, and the language from Jeff's memo is there.
It is there.
It's under, C, license
Yep.
requirement.
So shall submit proof that the application to the Cannabis Control Commission has been deemed complete pursuant to 935 CMR 500.102 with copies. Okay, it's in there.
Is that everything, Jeff?
Yeah.
Alright,
Okay.
I'm good with that language
so
there.
moving
So-
forward,
Okay, so that one, Jim wanted to skip ahead to the end.
So
Spoiler alert for
actually,
that, but-
no, I still,
I know.
I'm sorry, I know we want to move forward on this, but did we answer his question? You have that as a tool that you can use, but your question is when they form a line, what do you do?
I think that to me, that clarifies the line, because they would at least have to have their application packet into the CCC. Oh, so then I don't know. It could be conceivable that you could get 6 applications the first year, and they will, the order in which they get public hearing with the planning board is based on their ability to complete the
Process?
CCC application, at least the application.
So that's good
That
enough
would
for me.
allow
Is it
them
good
to
enough
then
for
make
you?
their formal application with the planning board. Yes, that's useful. There is, I just want to be clear that
That's not
there.
in the language.
What's that?
That's not in the language we just agreed to, though, right?
Right,
I mean,
so-
we should clarify that.
Okay,
so the
how
balance,
and
the last two that don't get approved, they have a completed application with the CCC. They have not come to us yet because they haven't showed us that they've completed their application. The other 4 did. Or maybe they did, maybe all 6 did.
right.
But we got them in a certain order. So the other 2, do we hold them and say you're next in line in July 1st, 2019 because your application's complete with the state?
Or you
and it's
say we
complete here?
can't accept your application
Or
at this
do we
time
do a
because
waiver?
reapply on this date.
I mean, I guess there may be a need to finesse a tiny bit of language
Yeah.
here. It would be the planning board would have to understand the timing of other applicants, and in theory, the planning board could issue a special permit, but it would be a condition of the approval that they are not able to open until
July
the
1,
next
2019.
year.
Right. and-
It's hard. It's not the easiest
Well, the other
thing to
thing
do.
is that we don't want to deny, you don't want to just reject the application, because we could have 4 people apply, tell the 5th person to go away, and one of those 4 falls through for either because they
Yeah,
don't
that's
meet the
right.
special
Very
permit
good
criteria, or they want to do something else. And we don't want that to be the case.
I like the way you set that out, or we can go through the whole process, but it's contingent upon the
A
availability.
conditional
essentially.
special permit. I mean,
Right.
because the other thing is that we may have it capped at 4 in, August of 2018, but then one of those may shut down before July 1st of 2019, and you may reopen one of those licenses. So, I mean, there's,
So that puts the burden on the planning board. We have to put it in our language.
Right, but the lineup puts the burden on the applicant to make it through this CCC process
Right.
successfully, and then you may have a couple that the likelihood that they both get issued CCC licenses on the same exact day is low, but there could be a potential for there to be jockeying for that 4th license in the first year. There's no
Right.
doubt, but that's the result of
Yeah, right?
phasing
well,
it.
yeah, I mean, and
I think we've gone as far down that rabbit hole
Yeah,
as
I
we
mean,
can
as long
go.
as we can do, I mean, we can do it, it's up to them.
But I wanted to make sure he was.
okay,
he
but
had
so
a path forward.
our language, the language that we just voted on doesn't explain the order of priority. It doesn't explain whether someone who is the 5th applicant in 2018 is first in line for 2019, or if we begin accepting applications on July 1st of that year. We should,
Do you think that has to be in the ordinance?
I don't know if it goes in the ordinance. I mean, it could just be that you tell people that our basic plan is you can still come forward
'Cause that's
and
not-
we will
If
write
you're
it
an
in the planning
applicant,
board's
though-
But that's not time,
contingent.
place, or manner, that's procedure.
Yeah, that is procedure.
well, it's the it's the manner of issuing licenses.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
It's definitely I mean, the thing is, if you think of this from an applicant's perspective, like, we want
Yeah,
clarity
that's
for an
nice.
applicant, right?
well,
And-
and
is,
part of our
right.
job is to provide the applicant with a clarifying document.
Right.
So this has to get boiled
Okay.
down, and that's one of the requirements.
So where does it go?
I think
So
we
we
begin
go
to
to licensing.
NC, 10-10-4C, and I think we have to say,
10-10-4C. Okay.
after that first sentence,
7.
no more than 4 cannabis retail
10-10-4C.
stores, storefronts shall be allowed within the city the first year starting July 1st, 2018.
Yes.
And then,
Well, can't you just have a sentence that said licenses are granted in the order that they are approved by the CCC?
regardless of which year they're filed,
Yeah.
Licenses over
mean,
limit may be granted a
interesting.
special permit which can only be used contingent upon availability of the
Well,
license.
that part we can resolve in the actual process. We can
Process,
say
okay,
this is
I'm-
conditional because you've already got 4, if that's something that we want to do, and that may be case by case, because I
Agreed.
don't know. But
Agreed.
I think if we,
Okay. So
I
what's
mean,
the
if we want to
actual
just
language?
stack them and just say, applications will be given priority based on the order in which the complete CCC application is filed with the planning department? I mean, query whether someone who's 5th in line in August of 2018 is going to still be around July 1st of 2019.
That's what I was just wondering. If
But they're always free to withdraw, and someone else can, or just leave it, and you won't really know.
Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah, I was
licenses
wondering
will
if
be
they should have
given
to
priority
notify,
based on
like,
CCC, based on CCC approval?
No, based on when CCC approval or application
Is deemed complete.
is
That-
deemed
that's
complete
the language they
and
have.
provided to the planning department.
Right, submitted as, yep. I think that language is sufficient to cover it.
Yeah.
Do you have that, Amanda? You're giving a
No.
look.
No.
Let's give
No.
Amanda.
Just got
Too
it.
much going
I have it,
on.
I have it.
Thank
So
you.
licenses will be given priority based on, let me know when you're ready.
Hold on. Sorry, my hand has been cramping up. Based on.
Why? I don't know.
CCC application is deemed complete and submitted to the planning board.
Deemed complete
Planning-
and submitted.
yeah.
Thank you.
Planning department.
Planning department.
Planning
Department,
let's say that.
Yeah, planning department.
Department.
And would, licenses would probably be either applications or special permit application
Yeah.
Yeah.
will be, so it's the first
Special
phrase
permit
there. I think it's,
applications.
you're
Jeff
granting
will
a
help you
special.
clean up that language.
Yeah.
Good.
What do you want me to put in the notes?
That's
is
good.
What I would like.
What you just got.
That.
What do you- Yeah.
Okay.
Jeff will help you out with that.
Well, should there be some sort of requirement of a notification of withdrawal? In other words, in your scenario where 4 people have applied, the 5th applies in August of 2018, it's just sitting there pending the next licenses to become available.
I
I
think
mean-
it's up to them. I mean, they either stick it out
And
and get the
also,
license.
I don't
or
think
they
you'll
withdraw.
know, right? If you're that 5th person and you're sitting there in October of 2018, you're thinking, like, boy, I really hope that I'm still feasible and I can make this work on July 1st of 2019.
Right.
And I don't know that, I mean, maybe someone will know and say, like, this isn't going to work, I'm throwing in the towel, but I would imagine most people will try to stay viable as long as they can, and if it doesn't work anymore.
Easthampton's an amazing community, and being one of those 9 here in this artistic community is going to be a huge advantage and a huge benefit, not just to the benefit to the business, but to everyone involved. It's worth sticking it out. The right person will wait.
Well, and I
So-
can also say that, you know, I mean, if that 5th person has a space, is the right person, has all their ducks in a row, and the planning board finds their application to be, you know, fitting within the community, they can apply for a waiver. There's nothing stopping them from applying for a waiver.
That's a good point.
Well, we don't have, I mean, we have an
We don't have to grant
application,
it, but they
we
can
have an
apply for it.
application waiver, but there's no process in here for a waiver of the cap, is there?
There is, yes.
J,
Alright,
10, 10,
let's-
6J,
I mean, that would,
7, 8, or whatever that number is.
Hopefully after tomorrow they'll have all their chickens in a row.
Yeah, after tomorrow they'll have their chicken. We're gonna spend a lot of time together.
I hate you all. Just teasing.
I think this talks about waive applicability of one or more of the requirements imposed by the CMR.
So the question is, does that include licenses? Is that in the CMR? And the licenses themselves, I think, reference that very.
But the cap isn't. The cap is in our bylaw. So I
Well,
mean,
this was taken from the state regs, and I did my
See-
best to adapt it to us, but
I think if we're gonna
we should do
do,
waivers.
I don't think a waiver for the cap is a good idea. I think
Yeah.
frankly, what you would do in that situation is they would go to the city council and say, change this number and give me a 5th
Yep.
one right now.
I agree.
Although, I guess they'd still be in line for it, so they could probably be the one to get that, but
Right.
I think waiving the cap is a dangerous
Yeah,
tool to give.
waiving some, yeah.
Totally agree.
I mean, this is your deliberation, but I disagree with that. I think that if you find the right person to come in at the right time, I mean, here's the thing: if you're someone who's doing this, and you have the right, I mean, space is not exactly prolific. I mean, we do have some empty places, but if someone finds the right place and it's the right match,
We want them,
But
but they
what,
should
like,
just go to
what a
you for
terrifying
that, not
amount of
us.
power to give to someone that you can unilaterally decide, or the planning
but
board
it would
can
be, it would
decide.
have to be based on some, you know,
They could go to
coherent
the city
information.
council and say, I want an
Yeah.
exemption, I want
I
an
mean, that
extension,
takes a
that'd
while,
be the
but
appropriate.
I'm fine with that. If that's not,
It'd be like
Okay.
someone wanting a 50th.
All right.
Well, let's
liquor
keep moving
license.
here.
Moving
so
on to the table.
I think the table we take out the second and third rows, right?
Yep.
We change, so Jeff, this might be more for you, for drafting ordinances, but that third column, the date, do we even need that since it's in the other section for when they're gonna roll out? Is that confusing, because there's actually 9 that we're voting for now? Is it, do we do a?
You're saying how do we put the 3 in for later because it's not written there?
Well,
Or just
typically
strike
our
it?
tables of uses have the business type and the zone that it's
Not-
allowed.
Not a date.
And it doesn't have, but we don't have other businesses that have a cap like that, even the alcohol ones, it's, that you have to have your license, so it's not part of the planning board. But I almost don't know if we need that column
I
at
don't think we
all,
do, it's repetitive.
right?
Because
Because
then
it's
we're
already
just-
in the other section.
If we make a change to one and forget it in the other, it's confusing. Let's do it once. We said it
So
once.
I don't think you need the table at all then, honestly.
We
Well,
like
well,
tables.
as
We're the
part of
planning
this, we're gonna
board.
also have to amend the table of uses, right?
Yeah.
Table of uses.
Yeah, so this table will just
get
be in the
translated.
table of uses
Yeah.
without the date allowed language, I guess.
Right.
I motion
Okay.
to strike the table in this zoning document and have the table of uses updated to reflect this information.
Which it is.
Do you want to reference that? See table of uses?
Yep, don't we?
Well, I mean, the table of uses gets amended whenever we change our ordinances, so it should,
I think it's implied.
oh,
Okay, I thought it said somewhere it's to the table uses, but maybe I missed
maybe it does.
Okay.
So the one question I have related to the table of uses is whether cultivation, manufacturing, and testing
All that's in
are because it's not in this
It's
table.
not in this table, but it's
No.
in the table of uses, which Jamie has on the computer. You can put it up. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
There's already, as part of this, there's an amendment to the table of uses
Right.
that was done.
Right. I think as long as that covers the other
Covers
uses.
all the other
Yeah.
ones.
'Cause it would
So
all- I
that
think it
will-
needs to be-
That will have to get looked at by the city council, but
Okay.
that should mesh with this.
Okay.
It does. As of now, it does.
Okay,
It just has social consumption still.
okay. D, all cannabis
Hang on,
cultivation.
I'm sorry.
No, no problem.
So are you going to put a line in here that says, reference the table of uses under this document, and whatever it is, wherever it is located?
It'll be at the end of the ordinance.
Well, the
right?
table of uses is in the zoning, it's for all uses, so there'll
It's
be new
implied,
lines added in there, so that's
Everyone
part
has
of what
to-
you have,
Okay.
that's where you'll check for where it's allowed.
So we're
But-
just taking it out of here and.
Yeah,
Get rid of, but it still exists. It's not gone.
and all the
That's still-
information that's in the table of uses is in this too, because it's telling you the zones that they can operate in.
No, I made a motion to pull that out. Do you feel you need one, or do you want me to retract it?
Nope, let's do it. Can I get a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Jim. D, all cannabis cultivation, processing, testing, product manufacturing, retail, and other state licensed cannabis businesses shall operate within a fully enclosed building. For purposes of this section, a greenhouse shall be considered a fully enclosed building. However, a partially enclosed deck that is part of a cannabis business is allowed as long as other provisions of this ordinance are met.
That could probably stay, actually.
I'm fine with keeping it. I don't see there's anything
Doesn't
an
have
issue
to
here.
I think
Doesn't
my
have a
only
sign.
question was with the enclosed deck, which I think I asked at the last one. So the
Yeah.
the concept there is that it just doesn't have a roof.
Right.
Right.
So
But
I
it still
guess,
has to apply with things like if you're growing.
well, that's what I was
can't-
gonna, right, so
Can't be seen, all
for
the other
provisions of
regs.
this ordinance and state regs or something like that, right? Because that's where I think they have the requirement that you can't see what you're growing, you can't see the use. So I would just suggest that we add, as long as other provisions of this ordinance and the CCC regulations are met.
Which you might want to specify, MGL, whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Someone can ask
Any,
Jeff to
any
find
objection to that one?
None.
Okay. E,
Can I just-
cannabis establishment.
Sorry, it's unclear. I'm struggling because I don't know how much to raise now or potentially bring at the city council hearing. But I just wanted to, on the cultivation, the regulations do contemplate open cultivation.
Mhm. Yeah, Northampton spoke about outdoor.
So the way that I am reading this is that you are restricting open cultivation to greenhouse only, like, requiring it in a fully enclosed building. And so I don't know if that was the intent. I was trying to quick thumb to the.
I
I
mean,
think
when we-
originally that might have been the intent, but I think this is a relatively new since the draft regs came out.
Right.
And I know that other communities are putting it in, and it has been brought up about agricultural, the ability. I'm not opposed to having it, exempt outdoor grows and then adding that, that definition in there. And I don't know if that's something you guys want to do, if you want to leave that to us, but.
I mean, when we talked about it before, and I think we had some people come and speak, that there was a serious question about whether that was ever going to be economically feasible for a
Yep.
commercial standpoint.
area.
That the
Exactly,
home grow would be outdoor grow, and that was definitely done, but that for these commercial projects, it was much more going to be either greenhouses or
Controlled
more likely
environment.
what we see like at INSA, where it's inside completely. But
And keep in mind, none of this applies to hemp. Hemp is a completely separate thing that's outside of all this.
I would prefer to not open that can of worms right now.
I agree.
Since the
I mean, I
city
think
council will
that's-
still have a chance to look at it too.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's, yeah.
The intent was to keep it all enclosed.
okay. So E says a cannabis establishment is permitted by special permit in highway business, downtown business, and mixed-use mill industrial and industrial zoning districts. Any objections to that?
No.
Or changes or comments?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's, now we're in the moving parts around, and when you move one thing, it affects something
Yeah.
else. So just in E, this was previously a cannabis establishment, which again had multiple groupings
Yeah.
under it. So
Retail.
what is, just the thing that concerns me here is,
The pulling out of social?
no, well, the pulling out of social, I think we're addressing earlier that it's just not going to be included, but it's the cultivation, manufacture, research facilities fall under a cannabis establishment. And I guess I don't have the table of uses to know if, again, in the downtown business, are you allowing cultivation? Because I think that
Well,
was
so that
where,
was the question, right? And so Jeff's memo raised it, and we had talked about it a little bit at our planning board meetings, is the two sides of the same coin. One, whether you want a more traditional industrial use, like either large-scale grow or manufacture in a downtown business, or the flip side, if we want to talk about whether retail should be occurring in an industrial zone. And we've talked about it in the past. I think when we did our draft, we sort of decided that if people could make it work, okay, but.
We're talking about a
it's-
cannabis product manufacturer, G in the definitions, right? And whether that should be in downtown business. Should the G definition be in downtown
Well,
business? Is that it?
here was my
Or a
thought process
testing
with the same.
facility.
So Jeff, when I read your memo, I did think about this, or at least I tried to. And the reason why I left it all in is, and I think I mentioned this before, is that we do, within our zones, we have so many, such a variety of different spaces. So if you think about like a cultivator, you might have somebody that is in our mill right here, which is in downtown business, which could potentially, host a cultivation facility or processing facility. There's a greenhouse in the back parking lot. So if someone was industrious and wanted to, so what I'm saying is there's so many different uses within our different zones that by restricting that, we are de facto restricting certain uses in, or multiple uses in certain zones.
But that's what we do,
Does
so
that
think
make
about the
sense?
flip side, right, is like downtown business, like you couldn't get one of those storefronts and open up a food processing plant in one of those storefronts as an industrial use and sell it somewhere else, but if you had cannabis in it, you could. So like all we do, right, when we do the zoning bylaws is figure out what should go where.
Right.
So I think there's the question of whether some of this stuff is gonna be so industrial in nature, and I think it would be likely the testing, the manufacture kind of thing, where it's gonna
Right.
be more of a complex industrial process maybe, but.
Absolutely, but those could go in, a formal industrial mill, which
Yeah.
isn't downtown
That-
business.
Right, but so that's what I mean.
And,
so
I mean, I think if I'm a business person who wants to open up something like that, I'm probably not going to get a prime storefront.
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, I feel like market forces are going to dictate where
Yeah,
people
you're
go.
They
in
are,
some
but
respect.
it's also our only way, if somebody wants to open up a large-scale industrial cannabis
We
testing
don't
facility
have
or manufacturer.
Stuff downtown that's big enough anyway for that, so.
Right, but we can stop that if
No.
it's someone who's making granola bars by saying this isn't zoned here, and we've determined that, but if they have cannabis in them, we can't. And it would just be allowed by right. So I think that's just the thing to think about, is whether these more industrial uses aren't appropriate for downtown business.
I don't think we can
Even
do
if they
the
include-
product manufacturer, because it could be something as simple as a kitchen, and I think if you have a downtown business that's gonna,
I was just
produce
gonna
and
say
sell,
that.
they should be able to have a kitchen to do it. But the cultivator's a little interesting, the E, are you growing
Right.
in the downtown? That one is a little
I mean,
dicier.
Well, I
like
think
INSA, right?
there's something about if it's in an existing building where it's desirable, and Easthampton's lucky to have the mills activated.
Sure.
But I guess the concern may not be necessarily downtown business because it just may not work. But when you get into the highway business, the value of land is significant, but to put up a metal prefab building with the potential value of the cultivation revenue may allow a vacant parcel to be developed in a way that you might not expect. So especially, I guess, in the highway business is probably the district that is the pivotal point where whether a cultivation facility, and you think brand new buildings are actually going to be less expensive in some cases than retrofitting an old mill. So there have been proposals for cultivation facilities that are brand new. The costs are actually not, I mean, I wouldn't throw around numbers that are, it's really expensive, but reasonable for a business person to consider constructing a brand new building on a vacant parcel and reduce costs. So
And
it's just
especially
not-
if the
With the existing
entire,
building piece?
and especially if the entire zone, like you couldn't come in with a new industrial, if that business fails, you've got a Costco warehouse kind of
Like-
building, that the only thing that can go in there under the zoning would be a cannabis-related industry, which may mean that it sits there forever.
Is there a way to insert something into this that said, talk about new building? Because I mean, like, I guess I don't know if Cook Building Supply is still there. I feel like the sign got taken down, but I see that
they closed.
Right.
that's in highway business,
Yes.
and that is like,
Right.
I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Intriguing.
So
You know what I
you're
mean?
saying
It's like a-
existing structures. and-
Existing structures could be exempt, I guess. I don't know.
You could say something along the lines of, I don't know exactly where, maybe it's in E. So to me, the question between item E here and you had formerly had the full table of uses, which is where you can take things out of certain districts. That would be for new construction, let's say. You could have some sentence in here that, for reuse of existing structures, it could be allowed in the highway business or cultivation or certain uses. I would need a little bit of time to think about
Wordsmith it?
this, yes.
Okay.
But
I'm fine to give you that time.
Wait, but wordsmith what? What are we exempting? What are we limiting?
I think you're thinking about allowing cultivation
In
manufacturing product manufacture in the highway business
So we're adding.
where it is occupying an existing structure. Otherwise, it would fall into a prohibited use.
So no new building.
I'm just,
development. And that would deal with the blight issue that you were referring to.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would at least force someone who does that to be in an existing structure that presumably, I mean, it doesn't necessarily though, I mean, if you're gonna retrofit an old building into an industrial use and then leave it vacant.
It's the same.
I mean, it's not the
Right.
same, but it still creates that potential problem.
Wouldn't that be part of the special permit process, is that you're evaluating, for instance, you're evaluating the building's
Yeah.
ability for reuse?
Yeah, what's your exit strategy? That is something that we.
Right, like,
Well, no, I mean, we don't look at like the financial viability of the project, and we certainly don't for something like this. Like, it's not like a solar farm where we get into the decommissioning of it, and we get.
Why not?
I mean,
We don't do that for
I guess we could, but
restaurants
it's a
or-
huge burden on them. I mean, they have to post a bond
Yeah.
for the 30-year life of a solar farm
Yeah.
for the value of us. I mean, I think that's a huge burden for an applicant who just wants to open up
We
a.
don't post a bond for small oven. We can't. I mean.
Right.
we
So I
can't.
mean, I think that would be. I mean, I don't think that would be fair. But so I mean, we can't look at an application and say like, well, you know what, like, but if you leave, this building's going to be hideous. Like, there's nothing. We have to have like something in the ordinance that empowers us to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's just a thought. in terms of,
yeah. I
you
mean,
know,
it's just it's part of the wrinkle to the fact that it's zones where you can't. It's not open to like all other industries, so you don't have the full market of potential tenants to take it. Even where they have that, I mean, it's a problem with those. It's one of the arguments against the big box store, right? Is like, who else is coming in for 100,000 square foot airplane hangar? So I mean,
I need
I'd
an
rather not
action.
touch it.
I'm
move
inclined to
forward.
leave it the way it is for now and let city council deal
I
with
agree.
that.
Let's leave that.
Honestly, we're gonna have to start doing some of that because
see a
it's
lot
getting
flying
way too
over the
late.
wall.
We gotta-
a lot further to go.
Yeah,
I'm
We
happy
got
with
it.
it the way it is.
we only have a couple more hours
hearing.
left in our
I think it
deadline here.
stays.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is my deadline.
Yeah.
All right, no retail storefront or, oh, cross that out. No retail storefront shall be located within 200 feet of, that'll be another retail
No,
storefront.
of the same type, so just get
Okay.
rid of or
Or
adult social consumption business.
Yeah. So
So
no
no retail storefront of the same type
Oh, I see.
shall be located within 200 feet of the other business.
And just so you know, one of the things that was mentioned in comment tonight was exempting mill industrial for that.
Yes,
Shall
so this isn't downtown business?
So this would be in downtown business.
Just downtown business?
Just downtown business.
So no downtown business retail storefront.
Wait,
Downtown
Wait,
business.
what?
Wait,
No,
yeah,
this is specifically for downtown business, right?
This is
Right.
specifically
Yeah.
for downtown
No,
business.
So, no downtown business retail storefront of the same
Yeah, yeah.
type shall be
Yeah,
located
in
within
downtown
200
business.
feet.
Exactly.
Or,
So all other zones are exempt from this.
Well, it's retail, so
Changes to this text.
Yeah, so other things, non-retail, would be viable.
So two retail
well,
stores
but it
can
was
go in
just
and
the
out.
mill building, right? So it would really be no downtown business, highway business, or industrial
Right.
retail sales.
So it's not just downtown.
No.
It's
So
it's
the
everything
only
but mill
time-
industrial.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm getting tired.
So we can really not put, we can say no retail storefront. It's really no retail storefront shall be located within 200 feet of another retail storefront, except in the mill
Except the mill
industrial.
Yeah, you gotta go with the
Got
easier
it.
option.
Well, so first of all, we'll do the measurement for the same way we did before, right? The primary
Measured-
entrance.
Yeah, shall be
okay,
measured by typical
pedestrian travel.
path of travel from primary door to primary door.
Perfect.
Are we okay with 200 feet? Does anybody want to change that? Or first of all, does anybody not want the buffer? Do we want to discuss the need for a buffer, and if so, the amount?
From door to door, I think 200 feet's fine walking distance. I think the buffer's needed. I don't think it makes sense to have two retail establishments next to each other.
I don't recall, in our version, we sent them 50 feet. Isn't
50
that
feet.
what-
I thought it was 50, yeah, 200
Yeah.
feet
How did
seems
it
a
get
lot.
to 200?
So I think 200 had evolved with the, because out of concern for a larger number of types of businesses.
So it's gonna be 12.
Yeah, so when there was going to be 12 and when we were going to have social consumption in play, was the attempt to not create a facade, for instance, in downtown business where you have, retail after retail after retail. Now that the number of retail has shrunk, I think it might be appropriate to discuss shrinking that buffer as well.
Well, I also think, though, this is what Jeff was talking about with his buffer discussion before, is that it's not so much, like, I don't really have a problem with a storefront, like a marijuana district.
Road.
Like, that doesn't really, but I do think that you run into issues where, I think especially in the first year of this, it's gonna be crazy traffic and foot traffic, and that just separating those issues, I think it's gonna be hard enough at each one of these facilities to manage the flow. And the idea of having them side by side may make it like insurmountable. I mean, I can imagine it's hard enough for a business if you have a cannabis retailer that opens up next door,
Right.
and if you have one that opens on the other side of you too.
Yeah, I think for here, a buffer makes a lot of sense.
Well, and go back to sustainability again, it like creates kind of
It does
specific
help the
zones for
market,
these
right?
businesses to operate in, so I guess, yeah.
But the
that's-
number, I mean, I think hopefully we all agree with that, but the number, is 100 a better number?
Who said you had another meeting last night?
I mean, the idea that we did 50 was because the typical storefront is about 30 to 40
Right.
feet
Yeah.
wide, so they couldn't go right next
Right
to it.
next
They
to
had
each
to have
other.
at least one storefront in between them.
But thinking about the traffic issues and the pedestrians, I'm not sure that accomplishes that.
It's the parking. Imagine putting 2 or 3 of those up on Cottage Street, where are you gonna park on a Friday or Saturday night? You're gonna choke out the
Where you park
restaurant.
right now.
Or just the line stuff, we've been talking about the line stuff that are here, is
Yeah.
queuing out and waiting in the street.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
I think 100 is a nice middle ground in there that accomplishes the goal.
I mean, this goes back to 100 versus 200 versus 350 versus 500. It's, 200 feet versus 100 feet, it's still going to be parking issues if they're both really, really busy
Right.
retail stores.
Very true.
I'm okay with 200 feet of walking, pedestrian walking. That seems like, that's nothing.
Yeah, I don't think that's
That's
very
too-
far either. I don't know that it
Yeah,
it
when you
really
think about
impairs
it.
anything, but I also don't know how much we need to go back and forth on this one.
Yeah, what's the frontage of your house?
More than that.
Right. So, I think 200 feet is acceptable, personally, unless someone really has a strong opinion about
Well,
moving it. less.
200's fine.
You don't have to vote on it.
Can I get a motion?
Do we have to have a motion?
It's
It's already in
already
there?
Oh.
We're just leaving it? Okay.
Unless someone wants to move to change it.
And
All right.
moving forward.
All right. 10.10.5, odor, no cannabis establishment
No
shall allow the
change.
escape of noxious odors. The only thing I had is, I think we talked about, or gases or smoke or something like that.
Gas.
Odors or gases, yeah.
Gases, is that how we got smoke in there?
Yeah, and it's less relevant now, but I think it's still worthwhile. I mean,
I think it's better to be safe than
fine.
sorry, right?
That's easy.
So I would say we'd add that gases back in.
So noxious odors or gases?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, there
All right.
was still 8.
All right.
Uh,
All signage shall comply with commission regulations in section 10.0 of the zoning ordinance, which
Yeah.
we get to work on next.
Fine.
Hours. No cannabis retailer shall be open to the public no earlier than 8 a.m. or later than 11 p.m.
Right.
In downtown business, hours will be restricted to 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. And we can cross out the last sentence, but,
Has this changed since we talked about it last
It
meeting?
is.
yeah, so this has changed since we last did it, right?
Yep, because we had it 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. everywhere, and now we've got it as
10 a.m. to
in
11
downtown
p.m.
business is 10 a.m. We
Yeah.
made it.
Which was a concession to the schools to have it open after the kids were already.
Yep.
Okay, I'm all right with that.
I still have questions about that. I'm sorry. What if they need early deliveries for product, or what if they need to wake
This
up
is just
early to
open to
cook
the
something?
public.
this is to the public.
Yep, open to the
So they can
public no
operate and
earlier
prep
than-
and do all that stuff. It's not, it's
Yep.
just public.
Love that answer.
Okay. Visual impact, cannabis plants, products, and paraphernalia shall not be visible from outside the building in which the cannabis establishment is located. No outside storage is permitted.
Yep.
And just, I believe that's in line with the state regs. That's not
I think
an
that's
extra.
lifted, yeah.
That's not an extra imposition that we're imposing.
Right.
That somehow,
Yep, and that makes sense.
yeah.
Would that be the kind of thing where if you said pursuant to 935 CMR, do you think that would offer an additional reference to the CMR regulations to tie it directly to that?
You can if you want to. I mean, I would think that anybody that's applying for a license has read that front to back.
Well, I think if I'm understanding right, you're making a point against potential, I can't, whatever the heck it is that you have to comply without. Help me out here. It's
Impracticality.
Practicability.
Impracticability.
Right? So that by making that, we're saying, hey, we didn't just come up with this. It's actually
I mean,
in
can we say
relation
that
to
about
zoning.
any of this? Well, that's fine.
I like
have
that.
no problem with it.
I like that idea of adding that in.
Okay.
So tying it to just generally, because they may change, but at least if you have, pursuant to
Okay.
935 CMR, the visual impact shall be this. I think it offers a little more ability for the planning board to go back to those regulations and make
Okay.
sure that all is
That's
working.
fine.
Okay, moving forward.
And cannabis establishments are not permitted as a major home occupation as defined in section 10.4 in the Easthampton zoning ordinance. We spent a lot of time on that.
I'm
I don't
good
think we
with
need
it.
to change that,
I'm
right?
good with it.
Fine.
Can I add one here? I think this was the point that I needed to add something
Yeah.
that I didn't have in the memo. Sorry.
Oh, no.
This is the time.
This is the time.
This
I
is the
agree.
time to get
No.
it in. I wanted to
We're
get
here
it in
to do
earlier
that
while
right.
other people were here,
I
but
mean,
I think this is something that is coming to light more recently. So after the issuance of the draft regulations, there has been identified a gap in establishments where you can consume cannabis, and it's the private membership clubs. So there's an ongoing issue in the city of Worcester, and the city officials have felt as though it's a loophole that they didn't close. And this is the time to talk about it real quick, and it could be something that is further addressed at the city council, that's fine. But the zoning bylaw contains a definition for membership club. A social, sports, or fraternal association or organization which is used exclusively by members and their guests, and which may contain bar facilities. And so the caveat is that these establishments are deemed to not be open to the public, which then makes them private. And it's just a concern. It's something I definitely wanted to mention as potential possibilities, whether or not it was something that you were considering. So the
we
Pascomic
already have those,
Club
right.
is just, it's not that I am trying to single them out. It's just, and it's the example
Right.
that you would want to think about in terms of closing the gap for now, which would be something along the lines of, for the purposes of this section, a cannabis-related business shall be regulated under the applicable adult use of cannabis section of this ordinance. There's some way to, so you did it with the home occupation, you're saying that the use is prohibited. It seems like prohibiting it in the zoning would eliminate that option
Is there
until some.
the social club? Is that just allowed by right anywhere right now, or what's the process for that?
Yeah, there are permitting requirements in the zoning bylaw, and I don't have my copy yet, so I don't know if you have one with the table of uses. It's allowed by special permit across the board.
Okay.
The problem is that there is a way to consider it exempt from even the state licensing.
And there's a place in Worcester that's testing the bounds of that right
Yes,
now.
and it's just a concern that I want to have on the table during the public
Kudos to
hearing is
them.
that without addressing it, there could be ways that this could happen without the control or oversight of the city, which.
Yeah, and without us figuring out when and how to do it.
But they could do it right now.
They could do it right now.
Yeah.
Right, but right now the public hearing is open. You have this period of time where the zoning and consideration is in effect.
I have no comment on that.
I don't know if I'm
So it's something that I'm willing to find out if it gets clarified in the final regulations and
Yeah.
have the discussion in city council. That's fine. I just
I think
want to
that's
raise it
worthwhile.
as.
I think it's something that should be discussed either way, whether it's something that's determined to be permissible or not. I think it's worthwhile to bring it up like this.
Now is the time between now and the hearings at the city council. It
Yeah.
just needs to be addressed one way or the other.
Okay.
Or
This is me
acknowledged.
addressing it. I have no comment.
Okay. Security, every application for a special permit for the operation of a cannabis establishment shall include a security plan describing all security measures. This should include site security, security for the transportation of cannabis and cannabis products. Safety plans should mitigate any potential harm to the employees and the public, including ensuring all customers are 21 plus. These plans should be kept private between the city and establishment and out of the public record for the security of the establishment. So I had two questions about this. First of all, I mean, we have to evaluate it at a public hearing, so I don't know how we can do it in private. But also, I think it's all governed by the open records law, whether it's exempt or not. Like, I don't think we can change that. So,
Well, I think, do banks give their security plans in public record?
medical marijuana
Medical-
facilities do. I
medical
mean, they
does,
come in,
yeah.
I mean, the whole idea about it is, right, is that they come in and they say, we've got cameras, we've got man traps, we've got security alarms, we've got all this, the garage. I mean, we got into medical marijuana, like the gate system for the delivery drivers, you know, they kind of have like a man trap for a truck kind of thing. Like it's, I mean, I think the whole point of it is that because it's supposed to be a completely comprehensive security system, you're not exposing flaws. But I don't know how we evaluate their security to make sure that it's sufficient, except at a public hearing.
I agree. I like the intent that we don't want to give it away because it makes it, but I think that they give away just enough about what they're doing to us that we, as has happened in the
Right.
past, as happened with INSA, that we understand the security protocol. So I don't think it's that much of a
I mean,
concern.
we
I
did
think we
that
have to
for
strike the private language.
Yankee, the gun manufacturer when they came in. I
Yeah.
mean, when we've had things like that where it's sort of, I think the bank, it's kind of, there's a little more self-interest in your own security because they've got money to lose and that's about it. But I think that there's more of a public interest in like a gun manufacturer or a marijuana facility or something like that where there's going to be a security component that's required.
I agree. We
But-
should strike that last sentence. What was your second concern?
I don't think it matters what we say about whether or not it's out of the public record. There are exceptions for certain like security documents, but like what we say in our local bylaws isn't gonna make a difference because it's either required by the state or it's not.
Right.
I would strike that last sentence.
What was your other?
That was it.
Okay. Do you want to vote for that?
I'll
I'm-
make a motion to strike the last sentence.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. 10.10.6 is just reserved, right? Adult on-site social consumption reserved, and everything else is stricken. Right.
I did notice a typo that other is also, it should be 10.7.
Oh, yeah, right, you said that. So that's
Yeah.
10.10.7 is other. A, community host agreement. No special permit shall be granted without first having an executed host community agreement with the city of Easthampton. Any issues with that, Jeff? I mean, that's what we want, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. B, state law Harry, speak up if you want me to change anything.
No, I mean.
All right. Cannabis establishment operations shall conform at all times to general laws, chapter 94G, and regulations issued thereunder. That seems straightforward. C, license requirement, we discussed that, right? We already voted on that one. E, energy use. I guess, although that should be D. There's
You're
another
happy
one.
I skipped ahead now.
Oh.
It is the.
D, energy use. All cannabis cultivators shall submit an energy use plan to the planning board to demonstrate best practices for energy conservation. The plan shall include an electrical overview, proposed energy demand, ventilation system and air quality, proposed water system, and utility demand. So this was another one, much like the cap that we put in at the last minute. We spent the last hearing talking about energy use and researching it in advance of that, which was like startling to me. It's like some of these big grow places are like, I think server farms are like the only things that use that much, but none of us had the expertise to figure out how to put in a hard and fast requirement. It looked like it was going to be burdensome either way, which again, maybe I'm contradicting myself on the buffer logic, but I don't know what the answer is on this, because I think it poses a real risk to city resources, but I also don't.
Leave it. I think they've done a good job of keeping it just nebulous enough. They have to present us a
They're
plan.
going to present their plan. I mean, it doesn't give
They
us
don't
any
have to-
teeth.
Well, they don't have, I mean, what was in there before was like great lot more.
Right.
Yeah, it
I
was a
mean,
lot more.
75% of their power had to be generated,
Renewable.
35% of it had to be
It was
generated on
unsustainable.
site.
That was our no fill in the blanks policy. We're putting in numbers for
Yeah.
everything.
Okay. So,
Okay, so are we okay leaving this as is?
Yes.
I am.
Okay. Line Q plan, F, the applicant shall submit a line Q plan to ensure that the movement of pedestrian and/or vehicular traffic along the public right-of-ways will not be disrupted. I think we should probably say unreasonably disrupted, or something like that. It's gonna be disrupted. That
And the actual title is Q.
is Q, yeah, we need another
Oh,
UE
yeah.
in there.
yeah.
G, traffic impact study or statement. Any cannabis establishment open to the general public, such as retail, dispensary, I guess it's retail or dispensary, shall submit a detailed traffic impact statement. This is required in each case where a proposed new building, use, or project will contain more than 10,000 square feet or will include one of the following uses which generates high volumes of trips: convenience stores, drive-in restaurants, automotive service station, or bank.
Pulled from the.
Trying to imagine those
At first, I was hesitant about this. I love a good traffic impact statement. Who doesn't?
But wouldn't that depend on the size of the business?
But
You get
that's
some
it.
little dinky store and wants a license.
they put the
compared to
10,000
Well, so
10,000
it's
feet.
10,000
But it's
square
capped,
And
it
that
doesn't
made
start
me
until you
feel
get to
better.
10,000 square
Yeah.
feet. I think that's right, I had the same thought that,
Yeah.
and, well, and this is from another section of our ordinance, right?
Yes, it
This
is.
is when we required anyway.
Yep.
Yes.
For-
There are ors in there, so I don't read it necessarily that you have to have 10,000 square feet to trip this.
Yeah,
Oh, right, okay, so a
Uh,
proposed new building use
that's a good point.
or project will contain more than 10,000 square feet or will include one of the following uses, okay.
I want it to be 10 feet or more to trip it, so if we need to adjust the language for that, we do, because I think
Well,
if you're less than 10 feet, you shouldn't have to have the burden of putting a traffic, those are expensive, it's not an easy
But
thing.
it would only be for these businesses: convenience store, drive-in restaurant, automotive service station, or
I thought it was
bank.
an or.
We're not gonna have a
an
drive-in restaurant. Let's just walk through that.
No, but this
Yeah.
is, so the second sentence is from the zoning bylaw now. The
Right.
zoning ordinance has this requirement for
So it
convenience
either has to
stores.
be 10,000 square feet or more, or it includes one of those four businesses in it.
Okay, I
So
see
those
what
are high-volume businesses, and so
So we're gonna allow a convenience store that sells.
I like the idea of a bank.
They're federal.
That's the
They're
loop-
never
that's the
I
happened.
mean, they're
loophole,
talking, again, they're talking
What
about
are
a
you storing at
Massachusetts
that
bank for
Massachusetts
marijuana,
bank.
could
Going back-
happen.
Going back and forth on that.
So there is a way, this could be written as after the first sentence, you're striking social consumption delivery, detail, so you shall submit a detailed traffic impact statement in accordance with section 7.41 of the zoning ordinance, and just, that just is text. I had kind of slipped that in there to give the context
That
from where
makes
it came.
yeah,
So
that makes
you
it
don't,
easier.
so it could be,
So one of the things we've liked doing is that in something like this, you're not expecting someone to do this and then also go and look at traffic impact statement, and like you can, even if it's the same language, like we can put in the requirement. Does that make sense, or is it just two places to change if we ever want to change that language?
yeah, I think I wouldn't want to reconfigure the section 7 where it came from, because
Yeah.
it's part of a larger section.
Right.
So that
No,
was,
so what I'm saying is like, if you read through, one of the ideas would be that this tells you everything you need to know about opening a cannabis retail establishment or whatever. But the flip side of that is that it's two different places. If you ever want to change it, they contradict each other and it's a mess. I'm okay with just referencing the section.
What is it, 7 what?
7.4104.
Are we okay with that, planning board?
Yep.
I am. So we're adding that in and striking the social consumption and delivery.
So let's
Yes.
say, any cannabis establishment open to the general public. Well, should we say any retail
Should we
dispensary?
just get rid of the parenthetical? Any
Yeah.
any cannabis establishment
Yeah,
open
like
to the
that.
general
Yes.
public?
Yep.
Shall submit a detailed traffic plan impact statement in accordance with section 7.4.104.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then that last sentence gets struck.
Yeah, okay,
That's the end of it. Yep.
that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so we strike that. part.
H, parking, as identified in table 10-3, off-street parking regulations and section 10.1.
Pardon me.
Yep,
I need to just make sure, and I know we need to move ahead, but I would just
No,
want to
no,
make
no.
sure I'm understanding correctly what you said. I want to wrap my head around it. 7.4.1.0.4 has most of that language already in there. We're just not being, we're not duplicating. But does it include the 10,000 square foot?
yeah.
Yeah.
And-
I want to make sure the 10,000 square foot is in 7.4104. That's a yes.
That's where it's taken from.
I just need to.
Yeah, no, I don't know which section it's from, I just know it's lifted verbatim from
Okay,
somewhere.
you can
but-
go on. I'll just.
Do you have it, you don't have that there,
I
Jeff?
just pulled the excerpt, but 7.4104. But
Includes the 10,000,
yeah, there's two thresholds.
right,
A building, a new building or use containing 10,000 square feet, more than 10,000 square feet, or
Right there. Will contain more than 10,000 square feet,
right,
or will include.
right.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I had to just.
Jeff, you don't have
I
this
didn't
all
want that to
memorized?
just get. whipped
All right,
out.
and just, so we corrected that E
Okay,
to a
sorry.
D, all the letters are off by
Yep.
one here,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we'll clean that up eventually. Parking as identified in table 10-3 off-street parking regulations and section 10.1 off-street parking and loading requirements shall apply to all recreational cannabis businesses.
Why
There's
does that
something
need to be
missing there.
stated?
What's that?
Why does that need to be stated?
I think we should just say shall be in accordance with section 10.10-3, table
Parking.
10-3,
And section 10.1.
and then 10.1.
I mean, one of the benefits of having something like this in here is because when an applicant looks at this, one of their questions is definitely
No
going to be about.
special parking things.
Right.
Right, no
Okay.
special. So, I mean, at least it sort of states that.
Got it.
Right, but there's like missing words or something, right? So we need
Yeah.
parking for all recreational cannabis businesses shall be in accordance with table 10-3 and section 10.1.
So are we striking the off-street parking and loading?
No, I would leave the parenthetical in there. I think just the as identified in part at the beginning. I think there's.
Identified, okay.
All right, H, permitting, the planning board should be the special permit granting authority. The application requirements and procedures shall be conducted pursuant to section 12.7, special permits of the zoning ordinance. No issues there. I, waivers, the planning board may waive applicability of one or more of the requirements imposed by 935 CMR 500. The applicant shall be required to submit the request in writing and identify whether the waiver is from a provision in state law or local law. Any waivers from the state law should only be granted if said waiver was approved by the Cannabis Control Commission under their waiver provisions available in. Following criteria can be used to request a waiver. Compliance would cause undue hardship to the requester. If applicable, the requester's noncompliance does not jeopardize the health or safety of any patient or the public. If applicable, the requester has instituted compensating features that are acceptable to the planning board. And D, the requester provides to the planning board written documentation in a form and manner determined by the planning board supporting its request for a waiver. So I think this is the language you had proposed, right, Jeff?
yes, and looking back at it, everything.
What about C, if applicable?
Yeah, so everything sentence.
That's the only question I have.
Yeah,
is part C.
A, B, C, and D are all pulled right from the draft regulations. Those are the criteria that the Cannabis Control Commission has to use
Okay.
to evaluate waivers. I may have muddled it up to kind of put it together while I was on vacation trying to get close together. There's two things happening here, which is the planning board could could provide a second approval for a waiver that the CCC granted. where I tried to throw in there was local law, and that may be where it starts to get confusing about which section of
Right.
this zoning ordinance could be waived. There could be an opportunity to pull out any reference to the local zoning and allow the waivers only to be those that were applied at the state level and may have some
I
kind
mean,
of
is the
application
idea
here.
that we could not allow a waiver that the CCC already granted? I mean, how,
Because it doesn't comply with something we have locally.
Yeah, I wouldn't see why not.
I agree.
so do we want to just limit it to
But traditionally,
waivers of state law and,
when we do these sort of things, it's been like Chapter 40R or whatever, where there's some incentivizing going
Right.
on. We'll make an exception for you on.
or it's a waiver of an
Setback
application
or-
requirement, not of an actual project, right? So it's like, you don't have to produce detailed drawings or something like that for something that's minimal.
And I love that, you put in here that there's a compensating feature, and I'm, expecting that there's something, it's a give and take for these waivers. But I question where it says if applicable. I mean, in every case where we've been before, when there's a waiver, just as the ones we were just talking about, there's always a compensating feature.
Well, sometimes it is just because it's burdensome, right? So like sometimes we have language in here, I think, where like if it's unduly burdensome to ask someone with this project to get a professionally drawn plan or an engineer's report or something like that, and you can just say like, that's not, we can vote on that, but I don't,
I'm good with it.
do we want to take out waiver from local law or just leave it in there?
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's the part that is a little sensitive based on the discussion about buffers and the cap. When I had
Right.
proposed this, I wasn't thinking about that.
I mean, I think that stuff gets messy. I mean,
Pull it.
So the first sentence it was the gist of it
Right.
Initially, that the planning board may waive applicability of one or more of the requirements imposed by 935 CMR. So that's the state
State
regulations. So it's just giving you double authority to approve what the CCC may approve as a waiver.
Okay.
The question comes with the next sentence about
Just pull that sentence.
Well, before you
Yeah.
pull it, can I
Or-
just throw an idea out there? What, so let's say 350 stands as a buffer. What if someone secures a building that is at 348?
I think the buffer's the buffer.
I mean,
I think
fair
that-
enough,
Well, this
but
is
that's
like a
like,
notification too.
that's crazy business. If someone's at 348, and
But then the next person's at 345, and then you've got someone at 320. Like, I
I'm just
feel
saying.
like
I'm just saying the ability to, especially when we're taking arbitrary numbers and applying them to real life situations, the ability to not have judgment and reason, and taking that out doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I think the problem with waivers is that it's not clear to an applicant what the requirement is, and there's no check on when we decide to grant a waiver. So you can get a board up here that says 50 feet is good enough for this business because it looks really good.
I'm not
Or-
recommending taking out the entire section on waivers, just that one sentence.
But that's the only one that applies to local law.
Right.
So that,
I mean, granted, they could come back to the city council. I'm
It
just
just doesn't state
Well, I think
that.
the only problem with that concept is if you say the buffer's 350 and they come in at 348, I think the problem is that you're more likely to get a proposal that's at 200 feet instead of 350, and then you don't have, like, this wasn't designed to give you the criteria to evaluate that. It was really just trying to acknowledge that the CCC can grant waivers from their own regulations, and it
and we
could
have the
trickle
ability
down.
to also agree with those waivers.
Right.
fair enough. I just
I
have to
would
say
So
it.
strike local law.
So
Yeah.
I think it, so I say it.
So which,
Just,
Stream
I
of
think just
consciousness.
striking or local law in that second sentence.
This is B, sorry.
This
J,
is
oh.
I, really.
Yeah, we're on waivers.
Waivers.
But IB?
No.
No,
Oh,
the
sorry.
second sentence
No, I
of
know,
the
but there's stuff
paragraph.
down
I know,
below.
that's all good.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Second sentence.
Local law.
Local law.
Yeah, strike local law.
state law?
Any objections to that?
No.
J, hemp, nothing in this bylaw shall be construed to regulate the cultivation of industrial hemp, as same as regulated by the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 128, Sections 116 through 123. Use of land or buildings for hemp processing and/or product manufacture shall be subject to such zoning controls as apply to other non-cannabis processing and product manufacture operations. That
Can't
just
touch
takes hemp out of the statute or
Love it.
ordinance.
Why are we, can we get rid of parentheses on cannabis?
I like that because I don't want it to be like associated with the cannabis at all. Like I think that can be confusing. But I agree. 10.10.7 severability if any provision of this section 10.10 is found to be invalid by a court competent jurisdiction. The remainder of section 10.10 shall not be affected but shall remain in full force. The invalidity of any provision of this section 10.10 shall not affect the validity of the remainder of this zoning ordinance.
I
All set.
motion to send this marijuana, recreational marijuana ordinance to the city council.
As edited?
As amended, right?
As amended.
Tonight. You second it?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.
That's
We'll
our
see you in
problem.
Can I get a motion?
few hours.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys
See you
shortly.
tomorrow night.
Thank you all. Maybe
Oh.
we're gonna come back for chickens tomorrow.
Yeah, back.
Chickens in a row.
Thank you all.
Chuck,
Right, like.
That's an old one. It is.
Thursday.